Hello, and welcome to this, our 112th live stream. Questions are the reward. This is, of course, a play on our Monday video, which has to do with rewards in heaven. And if you haven't seen that video, please do so after the live stream. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any of our content. Okay, this is our weekly live stream where we take your questions on ancient Egypt and the Bible and various other sort of odd topics. We do take both super chats and non-super chats. In fact, we usually start our live stream with a small number of non-super chats and end our live stream with non-super chats. So, if you want to leave a question to me, and super chats have priority, so this is like on any YouTube channel. If you want to leave a non-super chat, we ask that you put a Q and a colon in front of the question, so I know it's being directed to me. We also ask that you only post the question once, because I scan through the live chat and I queue off of other people's questions. So, if you post a question more than once, it throws me off like you wouldn't believe. So, we don't take questions that are posted more than once. Also, we ask if the question has to do with a Bible verse or an ancient language, please give me a little context. Like for a Bible verse, we ask that you put the what book it's from, what chapter, and what verse number. And for a foreign word, we ask that you put what language you think it's in and what you think it means. This just cuts down on me having to hunt. All right? So that said, let's get into the questions. Okay, and I did not prep the questions today, so this is going to take a moment. Just a second here. Alrighty. So we're going to start the night with 5 non-super chats, and then we're going to get into the super chats. Okay. Our first question of the night is from Darkblade. And he asks, was Mordecai made a eunuch when he entered Ahasuerus' service around Esther 8-9? If so, would he have been affected less than other eunuchs since he would have been made one around age 50, according to my calculations? Oh yeah, he would have definitely been in his 50s, maybe even his early 60s. So, let's bring up the Bible passage and take a look. No more eunuchs this week. No more eunuchs this week, please. Yeah, that was a little disturbing, I'll admit. Hey, but you found it educational, right? All right, so we're going to go to Esther. Esther, and it is 8 and verse 9. Okay. So the king's scribes were called at the time in the 3rd month, that is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded to the Jews, the satraps, the governors. Let's see, is there a little more, any more context? Okay. All right. Verse 7. So King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, behold, I have given the house of Haman to Esther, and him they have hanged on the gallows, because he stretched out his hands against the Jews. Now, you write to the Jews as you see fit in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring for a decree, which is to be written in the name of the king, and sealed with the king's signet, may not be revoked. So the king's scribes were called at the time in the 3rd month, that is the month Sivan, on the 23rd day, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded to the Jews, the satraps, the governors, and the princes of the provinces which extend from Ethiopia to India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to every province according to its script, and every people according to their language, as well as the Jews according to their script and their language. Verse 10, and he wrote in the name of the king, name of King Ahasuerus, and sealed it with the king's signet ring and sent letters by courier on horses riding on steeds sired by the royal stud. Okay. Now, we got to be clear on something here. He has not actually entered into the king's service. Okay, so he hasn't become an administrator. This is a temporary one-off. Okay? He's basically been, the king has basically said, okay, you do to the house of Haman, and in case you're not aware of the story of Esther, basically, Haman, the Agagite, probably related to the Amalekites, decided to wipe out the Jews in Susa. And he constructs this gallows to hang the Jews. Well, Esther basically, goes to the king and says, hey, all right, we're in danger. I'm being threatened with being killed by this guy Haman. So the king has made this decree, first decree that allows Haman to do this, and now he's got to write a second decree. But he's not willing to put his hand to the paper. Or the tablet in this case. And he says to Mordecai, you write the decree on what you think is fitting for Haman and his relatives. So this is a one-off where Haman gets to write a letter and the king signs it with a seal. And after that, his service is over. Okay. He doesn't have ongoing authority. So this is not a situation where it would require Mordecai to become a eunuch. This is, Mordecai's been invited into the palace, he writes his one-off letter, and then goes back home. And then things get done what need to be done. So anyway, that's what's kind of going on in this story here. So we got to be very careful not to read too much into this. I mean, it's a very, very tempting thing to overread Esther. Like, for example, you see, 127 provinces. Well, early exegetes confused that with satraps. Basically, the largest unit of a Persian of a province in the Persian Empire. But it's more likely it's sort of municipalities within satraps. Okay. So you see this as a common objection to the the historicity of the Book of Esther, when the text doesn't say satraps here. So, anyway, it actually says Medina. So that's more of a that's a regional province instead. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for that question. So, he was not made a eunuch because this is a one-off letter written in the name of the king and does not require him to become a eunuch. All right? Okay. No, it's not a common thing. I'll take his question followed by Cam Britt's question here. Okay, 501 Mobius asks, how widespread were signet rings dispersed? Not very widely. In fact, it was basically the king and maybe if he had a chancellor, a seal bearer. The seal bearer would have basically physical possession of the signet ring. The king himself wouldn't wear the signet ring. The seal bearer would bear the signet ring. And then the king would just tell the seal bearer, hey, you sign this document. And that's typically how it was done. So this way, if the king had to send his authority to another province, he would just send the seal bearer. And the seal bearer would go and sign on the king's behalf. So, that's generally how this was done. And the seal bearer would go with a contingent of soldiers and all that, so there was actually no chance of him getting knocked off on the way and someone taking his ring and forging documents. But there would be only one signet ring. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Cam Britt also asked a great follow-up question too. Is it true that gallows were a crucifixion as opposed to a noose? No. Oh no, this is like one of those eunuch questions. All right, let's describe what gallows are really in the Persian Empire. You're not hung by the neck until you're dead in a gallows. A gallows in the Persian Empire is an apparatus. It's a tall apparatus with a single sharpened pole, and then they impale you on it. Ugh, it's a ghastly way to die. Ghastly way to die. So that's the gallows. Danny Dement, Vlad the Imperial Player would love it. Yeah, he would. It's that sort of deal. Okay. So anyway, it's a good question because people do mistake what the gallows were. It wasn't suffocation. So anyway, thank you for that interesting follow-up question. Okay, our next question is from Bonbon, and he asks, how did Hatshepsut prove her military skills as pharaoh? She didn't. She was one of the few Egyptian pharaohs that never went to war. She just didn't go. If she had to do a punitive campaign, she just sent a general. She stayed at home completely. She never went to war. She was highly unusual in that respect. So while most kings had to prove their physical prowess by going to war and by doing these police campaigns, Hatshepsut never did it. It made her really unique in that respect. So it also made her very decadent too. Let's not be dishonest about that either. So she would stay basically at home and not stay physically fit. Okay, she kind of let herself go. She's the only only royal mummy that we have that's obese. They estimate at her death she probably weighed around 250, maybe more. So she was about 250 pounds. So, you know, she did not believe in physical fitness, whereas most pharaohs did. Even the ones that were lame had a kind of physical fitness to them. So yeah, she was a homebody. But then again, too, she had been the royal queen. She'd been the daughter of, I believe it was Amenhotep the First, I believe. So, you know, she lived a life of privilege. And that wasn't going to change just because she became king. So anyway, thank you very much for that question. Good question, but nope, war wasn't her thing. Well, going to war wasn't her thing. We don't actually have a lot of recorded military campaigns for her. Very few. Okay. The next non-super chat here is also from Bonbon. And he says, are we forbidden from striving to develop biotech that can make us immortal, since that would essentially be like biting off from the tree of life? It would be a really, really bad idea. Okay? Now, there's a difference between extending life and making you immortal. Making you immortal is making you so you cannot die. There is some indication that happens in some point in our future history. There is a very provocative verse in the book of Revelation where people seek death and cannot die. So there is some indication that this eventually happens. However, it's also the case that it's not strictly forbidden, but it's a really, really stupid thing to do. If you've read and understood the Bible, you don't need it. You don't need to be told this is forbidden, okay? Because, you're basically tempting God to come down and do summary judgment upon you. So, really, really not wise. Now, with that said, life-extending technologies could be okay. There's no question that we are permitted to extend life, but making us immortal, incredibly dumb idea. All right. So anyway, thank you very much for that question. Very much appreciated. Okay, the next question. Oh, they want the passage? Okay, in just a moment. Okay, I'll just grab that for you in just a second here. Okay, let me just find that for you. Oops. Okay. It is Revelation 9:6. Just throw that up there. And in those days, men will seek death and will not find it. And they will long to die, and death flees from them. Okay? So, when in human history has essentially men not been able to die? Especially in the book of Revelation, where death's everywhere. Death is everywhere in the book of Revelation. I mean, a third of humanity gets just wiped out like that. And now, in the last days of the book of Revelation, they can't die? Like, you know something hinky's happening there. Yeah, so, yeah, it's an incredibly bad idea. Yes, Bonbon, I know you don't believe in the book of Revelation, but you believe in the book of Genesis, right? God protected mankind from being both immortal and unregenerate by driving man out of the garden. So even if you don't believe in the book of Revelation, it's still a bad idea. Because God thought it was a bad idea for man to eat both of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. So, yeah, bad idea all around. Okay, the next question. The next question up. Is also a Bonbon question. And it is: what was the state of the Egyptian military during the reign of Thutmose III? Oh, it was a massive machine. Massive machine. I read they were rather inexperienced, hence why they couldn't contain themselves from looting immediately. Looting immediately was standard practice in any army of the day. Okay. The military of Thutmose III was highly effective, well equipped, and very well trained. Thutmose III was a really masterful commander, and he liked the military life. He grew up in the military life. Basically, his stepmom, Hatshepsut, basically sent him into the military to hopefully kill him off. What she didn't count on was not only was he incredibly popular within the military, he was also very good at it. So he took a real hands-on role in the military. So it was actually a very, very, it was probably the most capable military Egypt ever fielded, without doubt. The only reason they turned back from Kadesh on the Orontes was because Thutmose didn't want any more than that. He could have kept going into the Mitanni Empire, and Mitanni probably wouldn't have been able to stop him. But empires are expensive. So, he got as much as he wanted and went home. So, yes, he had a very good military, and they were very, very effective. Very effective. So, anyway, thank you for the non-super chat. Really appreciate it. And the final non-super chat for our opening here is going to be from 501 Mobius. Okay. And he says, in Judges 1:6, why did the descendants of Moses' father-in-law go up from Jericho, city of palms, to live in Judah when Joshua 6:26 curses any that rebuilds the city? Could there be a different city of palms? No. What's going on here is something else. The city of palms here is not really a rebuild. We got to be very clear about that. The city of palms is actually a village. Okay. So even though they destroyed Jericho, Jericho still had a viable water supply. But the city of palms was actually a small agricultural village. That's what it was. So it wasn't a rebuild. Okay? So when the city of palms was constructed, it was really just, as I said, a small village. It was not a rebuild of the entire city. That doesn't actually happen until the Book of Kings. And I think it's Book of Kings or 1 Samuel. Let me just check here. I can tell you when it's rebuilt and when the curse takes place, because that's actually in Scripture. So let's find it here in just a second. Okay, this takes place in 1 Kings 16, verse 34. Okay, so these are the days of Ahab. Okay, and verse 34 says, in his days, Hiel, the Bethelite, built Jericho. He laid its foundations with the loss of Abiram, his firstborn son, and set up its gates with the loss of his youngest son, Segub, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by Joshua, son of Nun. Okay? So this is the reference of the coming to pass of that curse in Judges 1:16. This is actually really a really interesting passage anyway. That whole idea of laying the foundations, basically leveling it. As we see, one of the things we find in like Nigro's 2020 site report of Jericho is that we have site leveling. The site is actually leveled to build on it anew. And this happens in the days of Hiel the Bethelite. And we actually have it recorded here in 1 Kings 16:34. So this is a fascinating passage because it tells us actually so much about, say, what we find in the archaeology at Jericho. So, I mean, it's an amazing passage, it's really interesting, and this is the point where the curse takes effect. And the curse hits him by losing 2 of his sons during the construction. So, sorry about that. All right. Get the tabs. Should meet the other ones too. All right. Sorry about the pings. All right, that should be everything major that's likely to ping. All right. Okie dokie. So, anyway, thank you very much for that non-super chat question. It's an interesting question, and I hope that helped answer it. Okay, so that ends our non-super chats. Now we can get on to the super chats here. And our first super chat, change here, is actually from Jack Ray, who buys us a coffee for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And I also saw the email donation as the PayPal donation as well for $50. Thank you so much for that donation. We really, really appreciate it. We appreciate all the support you give. And yes, I have my coffee here because it was another one of those sleepless nights. So I'm going through the coffee tonight as well. Caffeine. Wake-sustaining caffeine. So anyway, thank you very much for your contributions to the channel. Thank you for that PayPal, and thank you for that coffee. We really appreciate it. Our next super chat here is from Addison Weir for $19.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Concerning what you said last week about the Matlich interview, while he says Merneptah attacked Israel in the 1100s, he said the 11th century. That's actually the 1000s. That's the 1000s. Okay? I don't see him giving his date in his book. Could he be that he just misspoke? Yeah, it probably was. I mean, he probably did just misspoke. But he also had to mash that together too, and I thought that was a little difficult to do. Because really, Merneptah, he takes place at the very, very beginning of the conquest. Like in the first 5 to 7 years. So, you know, while we do see in the Merneptah Stela, you know, him recording Israel in Canaan, that is during the very, very early stages of the time of the Judges. Really before most of the history sort of, I mean, you might have had Jericho and perhaps Hatshepsut destroyed at that point. But that's actually before a lot of the subsequent events of the book take place. So, and really, Merneptah was only there to do a punitive measure against Gezer. That's the only reason why Merneptah was there, because Merneptah didn't exactly have an easy time rebuilding Egypt's military after the Reed Sea debacle. It took Merneptah like 3 months to drive out the Libyans. Egypt was not in a great state at that point, and there was even instability in the government. For example, the line of succession is there's a coup that happens right after basically the death of Merneptah. So Egypt is in this point in a very weak state. So, you know, he probably did just misspoke. And that happens. Okay. But it was big enough to sort of call my attention to it. He would have been better off, I think, if he tried to, you know, tease out some of the campaigns of maybe Dynasty 20. Because there's a couple of campaigns that they still do into Dynasty 20. Ramses IV does a campaign. Ramses III does a campaign. Ramses IV does a campaign. And so does Ramses VI. And sixth is that's the last one. The problem with those particular campaigns, though, is they're all sort of on the coastal plain and into the northern Levant. So none of them really get down into Judea. And we won't see that until Shoshank I. So I think if he had a sort of slightly better grasp on, say, Egyptian history, his thesis might have been more compelling. And it was clear that he didn't have that sort of strength. He couldn't really articulate that well. I mean, even, for example, like some of the garrison towns, like Beit Shean. I mean, Beit Shean survives as an Egyptian garrison town long after it's cut off from Egypt. So, I think if you're going to make a case for this being the second Exodus Part 2, you're going to have to sort of get your handle on the history of the garrison towns. Because most of the time, Israel leaves them untouched. And as I say, some of them last for 300 years after the fact. So that's long after the conquest. So, his thesis still needs work, even if he did misspeak, which is entirely possible. He probably did misspeak. So I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt there, but I do think he needs to work on this one a bit. All right? So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that helped. Okay. All right. And going to the top here, our next super chat here is from Destiny Knight for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Are you familiar with critical alternative origins for Yahweh as a deity? And do you have any thoughts on those theories? Okay. I have... It depends what you mean by alternative origins. Okay. Now, there are several theories out there for where Yahweh came from. We know it's not, some people think it's the moon god Eok. But it's not. The transliteration doesn't work. Okay, so you got that theory. And I don't think that theory has any legs. And most scholars don't think that one has any legs. You have people like, I myself hold to, say, the Akhenaten hypothesis, where Yahweh is basically brought from Midian into Egypt by Moses. And that's one possible theory. There's another theory that basically suggests that it was with the Israelites all along. A lot of conservatives hold that view. And even Michael Heiser held to that view. I don't hold to that view. I don't think there's a strong, compelling case there, because we find no evidence of Yahweh worship at all in Avaris. So, I think that one is going to struggle from the data. The other thing is, there's another theory, too, that also floats around, that it came out of Ugarit. So, basically, it was Yahweh was part of the pantheon of Baal, Mut, El, and etc. Those gods from Ugarit. However, we don't have any evidence of Yahweh in the Ugarit tablets. So again, this is one where the problem is, with all the possible origins for Yahweh, we just don't have sufficient evidence. I think the Canaanite hypothesis is the best going, but at the same time, too, it also struggles too with evidentiary problems. There just isn't any evidence. So we're only left with a biblical account as to suggest where the origins came from. And the origins in the Bible suggest it was from Midian. Moses' encounter in Midian. So there's also some more what we would call minimalist theories that are also there too. Such as that Yahweh was basically a regional Canaanite deity, basically a lightning god or a war god or even a sex god. And again, I think those are pretty thin. Those are all pretty thin. Again, no evidence. So, those are my thoughts on the theories. I have, of course, my favorite, but we're all dealing here with a deficit of material. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Destiny Knight for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do you have any thoughts on the claims that Zoroastrianism influenced early Judaism? God bless and thanks for everything. Okay, I have a few thoughts here. I don't think it influenced the earliest forms of Judaism. Like, for example, what we find in the Pentateuch. Zoroastrianism is really dualism. It's a theological dualism. You've got a god of good, Ahura Mazda, and a god of evil, Angra Mainya. And both of those are equal. They're equal gods. And they are responsible for the cosmic balance of good and evil. So you do see some slight influence of Zoroastrianism in, say, some of the prophets, some of the late prophets. Okay? And that does make sense considering the influence of, say, Persian culture upon later Judaism. But you're talking at that point of Middle Hebrew at that point. So I think that influence is often overstated. I'm a holder of the supplementary hypothesis for the Pentateuch, so I believe that the core documents were written by Moses, or at least his amanuensis, or even some of his contemporaries. So that said, Zoroastrianism wasn't even a religion at that point. So I don't think it had influence in extremely early. Like, at the time of the divided monarchy, it wouldn't have had any influence. And that's when we see the earliest, say, biblical texts, is during the divided monarchy. So anyway, and those texts would be the Ketef Hinnon scrolls. Okay. So anyway, that's my view on this. I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Jared Gilmore for $25. Thank you very much for that generous super chat. This passage has been used as an argument that Irenaeus was pre-tribulational. He means pre-tribulational rapture. Against heresies, Book 5, Chapter 29. And therefore, when in the end the church shall be suddenly cut up from this, end quote, is there credence to this? Unfortunately, absolutely not. Here's the problem. There was no such thing as a pre-trib rapture in the Christian church prior to the 19th century. What it's talking about here is actually premillennialism, not pre-tribulationalism. And what's the difference here? Okay. What you have with, say, premillennialism is you have a 7-year tribulation that comes before the millennial reign of Christ. With pre-tribulationism, you have the second coming of Christ, the rapture, happening before the tribulation. So what this is actually a statement of his premillennial views, not his pre-tribulational views. Basically, his idea is that come the rapture, and Irenaeus is not specific on this. We're not sure if he's pre, mid, or post-trib. But he's basically making the statement here that when the church, it's right for the God to come and collect the church, he'll do so before the millennial kingdom. Okay? So, but really, this is an anachronism. This is a theological anachronism. It doesn't happen in, say, Christian theology until the 19th century. Really, it's a view that was popularized in the Schofield Bible. So that's the first time we see the pre-trib rapture enter into publication within Christian circles. So anyway, thank you very much for that very generous super chat. I very much appreciate it, and I hope that helps. We do find really two major views of eschatology amongst the church fathers, if we want to go there too, which is that the church fathers were either amillennial or they were what's called historical premillennial. But there doesn't seem to be a large variation on their views of the tribulation. It just wasn't an issue for them. These were guys that were all going through persecution. They weren't expecting to be saved. Not by Jesus Christ coming. They weren't expecting it. They know they were going to go through fire. So, it's a persecuted church behaves very, very differently than a church that's awash in comfort and wealth. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Jonathan for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, is Jabin in Judges 4 the same Jabin as in Joshua 11? If so, how did Hatzor get rebuilt so quickly to oppress Israel after being burned? Okay. It's not the same Jabin. The sequence of events in Judges 4 and Judges 11 are completely different. Second of all, Hatzor did not get rebuilt in that time. In Joshua 11, this second Jabin, Jabin the second, we don't know how many Jabins there were, is called the king of Hatzor, but we are not told that Hatzor had been rebuilt. Instead, what appears to have happened was Hatzor had been a sizable kingdom. It had conquered 5 other kings. So they basically effectively moved the flag to another city and declared that Hatzor. Okay? It's kind of like when you like in marine battles, you have a flagship that, let's say, represents the 4th Fleet. Okay? And a torpedo comes and sinks that flagship. What happens is the command transfers to another ship, and that becomes the flagship of the 4th Fleet. So you get continuity there by just moving location. And this happens frequently. Okay, there are times when the name of a town will move to other locations, just because water sources dry up, or you have continuity of kingship, that sort of thing. Nathan Yadon says, like Pithom moving around, yes. Like Pithom moving around, it moves to several locations. Migdol also moves to a couple locations. Okay, so this actually happened more than once in the history of the Bible. So that's what happens. 2 different Jabins. Got a Jabin the first and a Jabin the second, and they're not the same. Different sequence events. Hatzor got destroyed in Judges 4, but had not been rebuilt in Judges 11. But he's still called the King of Hatzor. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Okay. Jack Ray for $5. Sponsor a bonbon question. Well, thank you very much for sponsoring that question, and thank you for that super chat. Let me see. Now, Bonbon, I see your question here on the Book of the Dead spell 17. I don't have that memorized. Okay. Oh, did he? Okay. Okay. Yeah, I don't have the I don't have the Book of the Dead tattooed behind my eyelids, okay? So I would need more time to answer a question like that. I wouldn't mind answering the question, but I would need to read it first. But there's so many bonbon questions and so many sponsorship for bonbon questions. We're just gonna pick them. Okay. I'll take this one here for his first sponsored bonbon question. Why did Egyptians give Ramses II a hard time for the state of the economy when he helped to defend Egypt and defeat the Sea People? Were they not afraid? Did they not know about what happened to other places? Okay. Why they gave him a hard time? Rampant inflation. Really, really rampant inflation. Ramses III had started to lose the hegemonic holdings. That was sort of the hedge. So it was in his reign that these things started to get lost. We know for sure they were lost by Ramses IV, his successor. But it would seem clear to me that already in the time of Ramses III, he had already lost control of Nubia and possibly most of Canaan. Under those circumstances, you have no more hedge against inflation. Everything is going to skyrocket in price. People are not going to be able to feed their families because they can't afford it. They can't make their goods to fast enough to buy basic grain. So we've seen this many times where an economy goes absolutely berserk, and inflation rises so quickly, it results in a revolution. Now, in this particular case, it resulted in an assassination. But this sort of unrest is really common when economies get ruined. I mean, to draw maybe a false comparison here, it's a little bit like what's happening in Russia right now. To be honest, their economy's ruined. And, we're seeing instability there. A lot of it, including a potential revolution or at least an insurrection today. So, you ruin economy, bad stuff happens, including loss of popularity. So, it didn't matter if he kept the sea peoples out if you can't afford to feed your family. So, anyway, that's why he was unpopular. That's at least at the end. At the beginning, he seemed to have been very popular. We have to remember that the Sea Peoples happened in the first 12 years of his reign. So I think you have a year 5 and a year 11 invasion of the Sea Peoples. Okay, so that's happening at the beginning of his reign, and that's at the height of his popularity. By the time the economic impact that's 20 years later. A lot of stuff went under a lot of water can pass under the bridge in 20 years. So, okay. Where's that? 7 questions up. Okay. 7 questions up from where I'm now? Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, okay. Let's see if I can find that. All right. So anyway, Jack Ray, thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated. And Talitha Kum asks a follow-up question here. Were the Sea Peoples one people or several? Were they Cretan or Greek? Great question. The Sea Peoples were actually several tribes of Indo-Europeans. Okay, they were probably a mix of peoples from the Greek archipelago originally. It could have also included groups like some of the Cretans as well. So that's possible. But they were Indo-Europeans from essentially, as I say, descendants of those Greeks that we find in the Trojan War. Now, we have records of several groups of them. The Dedan, the Sherohan, the Peliset, which is where we get the word Philistines from. The Luca. So there were many tribes of sea people. So it's not just one people, it's several. But they do seem to have an Indo-European culture when they arrive on the coastal plain. They start their migration to feed themselves on the west coast of Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey. And then they just sort of move down the coast. And they inhabit the coastal plain of Canaan, and they try to make their way into the Sinai, and that's where they stopped. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for that interesting follow-up. I hope that helped. Okay. Get back to where we were here. Wow, that's... Okay. Okay. Scroll down to the next one here. And Jack Ray for $5. Thank you much for the super chat. Sponsor another bonbon question. Okay. Yeah, I'm keeping track of the timestamps here because I know we got a lot of them tonight. So I'm keeping track of timestamps as we go. Okay. Let's find another bonbon question. Okay, I'll take this one from Bonbon. Why do some scholars place Exodus during the reign of Ramses III? I know this is, for example, Montfort Beatock does this. He will place the Exodus in the reign of Ramses III. Now, he's going actually not on the Egyptological evidence here. He's actually going on to the Hebrew evidence, which is he likes to ascribe a late date writing of the Pentateuch. So for him, the development of the Pentateuch really is what's guiding his view here on a later Exodus date. Another one that does this is Gary Rensburg. He also does this, and pretty much for the same reasons. They're holding that the Pentateuch itself, Moses lived around 1100 in their view, so 1200 to 1100. So for them, they're going to put this in the reign of Ramses III. Okay, so that's sort of their justification for this. So 1200 BC, that's where they're going to slot him. And again, it's based upon the writing of the development of the Hebrew language. Okay, now I got some textual problems with this, plain out. One, the Merneptah stela really seems to prove that the Israelites were in Israel by around 1217, and I don't think there's any way around this. I know there was a guy that I had an ongoing email dialogue with who published in ETS Jets, who basically tried to make this case as well, following after Rensburg. And he tried to make the claim that the Israelites in the Merneptah stela were still in Egypt when he wrote that stela. And I had to point out to him that no Egyptian king does a poetic epilogue celebrating the conquest of people inside his own territory. Okay, kings didn't do that. There were some other issues too with that article as well. The other thing is, I think there's problems archaeologically as well. We do have well-established Israelite settlements that are unmistakably Israelite settlements by 1150. So, you're really going from you're cutting that really close, that conquest narrative. So, you're already in Iron Age 1 at that point. And I think the destructions that we find at, like, for example, the most likely position for a destruction of, say, Jericho is going to be late Bronze 2B. So, again, it's mostly based upon, say, scholarly theories that they come down on this theory, not by, say, the archaeological evidence itself. So, anyway, thank you for that question, and thank you, Jack Ray, for sponsoring that question. Okay, and then we got another one from Jack Ray for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Sponsor any question. Okie doke. Let's see. Okay, I'll take this one from Boomer. And Boomer asks, any thoughts on Genesis 4:26? Sure, let's bring up 4:26 and read the text. Genesis 4:26. I'll bring up the Bible here and we'll read that in a moment. Do you think that God, which name, was worshipped in other cultures aside from the patriarchs and Hebrews? Okay. And 26 says, and to Seth, to him also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. Then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. Okay. Now, one of the things we have to understand about Genesis that we really need to keep in mind is it's a document meant to make the mixed multitude of Israelites a cohesive whole. It's a kind of anti-myth. When Moses comes out of Egypt with the mixed multitude, you've got a dozen different cultures, a dozen different creation myths, a dozen different views of God. Moses has got to take this mixed rabble and turn them into one cohesive people. And the best way to do that is to write a history for them. So some of this is retrojective writing. In fact, the book of Genesis is full of retrojective writing. So what we have in this case is that this is a retrojective writing. So it's not necessarily literally saying that men were calling on the name of Yahweh, but they were calling to God. This is the first point where they were calling to God. So that's what's supposed to gather here. That almost immediately after the death of the first human, okay, after the death of Abel and his replacement, men start calling on God for help. And that's what it's supposed to tell you here. It's not supposed to tell you that they knew the name Yahweh literally. So that's what you have to take away from the text. Now, on the other hand, I believe there were some cultures that did worship Yahweh besides the patriarchs. And the patriarchs are going to not call him Yahweh. They're going to call him El Elyon or El Shaddai. But it does seem that the Midianites worshipped Yahweh, possibly even the Edomites. So there's some actual possibility that, say, more than one culture was worshiping Yahweh, or at least his other by his other names at the time. Even, for example, the Jebusites might have been worshiping the god as El Shaddai. Like, for example, Melchizedek. He is the priest that was called the priest of God. And he is worshiping El Shaddai. Or sorry, El Elyon. So anyway, I think that there were other cultures that were worshiping the God of the Bible. They're just, most of them are probably going to be located in the southern Levant. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the question, and thank you for Jack Ray for the sponsorship. Okay. Our next super chat tonight is from Koheliful for $9.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. What Egyptian archaeological dig interests you the most right now, and why? What biblically linked dig interests you the most presently, and why? Ooh. Two great questions. The dig at Pithom is producing some interesting stuff. We got our first basically inscription from Hofra at that Pithom dig. So that was really interesting. There's all sorts of interesting stuff coming out of the Wadi Tumalot. So that's really, really interesting and really fascinating. So there's a lot of good stuff coming out of there. I think once they explore the more southern area of what would have been the Pelusiac estuary, we're going to find some interesting stuff there too. And Pithom is biblically linked to say Exodus chapters 1 and Numbers 33. So yeah, there's some fascinating stuff there. There's still a lot of good ongoing excavations in Egypt. Heliopolis has a good ongoing excavation right now. I'd like to see a lot more stuff come out of that. And that's also biblically linked because we see that referenced in Genesis to Asenath, daughter of the priest of On, which is Heliopolis. So anything that can round out our view of what biblical culture was like, what Egyptian culture was like, that's always going to be a great question, great dig. Anything that can fill our understanding in as to the backgrounds is going to be wonderful. Going to be absolutely wonderful. So those are sort of my favorite digs at the moment. It'd be still nice to see them find the scriptorium at Hatzor. That would still be just, I mean, and Hatzor is also an ongoing dig. So I'd love to see scriptorium come out of there. That would be just, amazing. Amazing if we could find that one. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And that's sort of my opinion on what I think is really looking promising at the moment. Addison Weir for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Addison question, finally. Describe your most controversial theological position in the most careless, provocative way possible. All right. And now the next bonbon question. Just joking. The most controversial position I have is the date of the Exodus, bar none. And the most careless way was just opening my mouth about it. Seriously. I mean, yeah, just saying anything at all. I mean, a lot of other theologians just kept quiet about that. And, you know, this has lost me jobs. This has lost me jobs. This has lost me teaching positions. So, I mean, I went to one interview once, and they asked me about the day of the Exodus, and I told them. That was the only question they asked. They said, "Thank you for the interview. We won't be pursuing your application." That is controversial enough to get you blacklisted. Okay? Blacklisted. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. But yeah, it's that controversial. And actually, I did a whole video on why this is so controversial. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, the next one is from Eric Ziegler for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hey, Dr. Falk, when the Israelites left Egypt, would they have used the Egyptian calendar? The Hebrew calendar is based on Babylonian. Would these differences make biblical dates harder to pinpoint? Okay. Let's correct one thing here. The Hebrew calendar, the later Hebrew calendar, is based upon the Babylonian calendar. The early Hebrew calendar was based upon the Canaanite calendar, like the Gezer calendar. They're different. The Hebrew calendar, the later Hebrew calendar from Mesopotamia, is a lunar solar calendar that has intercalation. The early Israelite calendar did not have intercalation. So the seasons would rotate through the calendar. We don't know why they chose that calendar, the Canaanite calendar, over, say, the Egyptian calendar. I think part of it was that in many respects, the Egyptian calendar was tied to the rise and fall of the inundation of the Nile. Israel didn't have a big river to peg your seasons by. So it probably did not so much matter what calendar they used in Canaan because of the steadiness of the climate. Basically, the climate there is very temperate, no matter what season you're in. And it was probably more important for the early Israelites to have trading relations and be able to write contracts with their various Canaanite neighbors. So, knowing that, it's very, very likely that they just picked up the Canaanite calendar for pragmatic reasons, not so much because it was the best calendar. So anyway, that's the best we have on this, but it does seem, even from, say, the early books of the Bible, that they had a strong preference towards the Gezer or Canaanite calendar, and they just didn't use the Egyptian calendar. They were aware of it. They were certainly aware of it. In fact, they patterned their 30-day month, their civil month, after the Egyptian calendar. They just didn't keep the 300 and basically the 12 civil months plus 5 epigomenal days. Of course, they may have excluded the epigomenal days too because of their ties to religious festivals. The other matter is that they had a lunar month, an observational lunar month, and a civil lunar month. So they actually had 2 months, different types of months. And it seems that the days that they used for most official discourse or documents seemed to rely on the observational lunar month. This led to a calendar, a year that varied and was roughly 354 days. So this can make things a little difficult to pinpoint dates sometimes, especially if you're dealing with long stretches of time. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helps. I should also add, too, that the Israelites changed their calendar several times. They don't just keep... There are times they use the Egyptian calendar, like when they're under control of Egyptian hegemony. It's at that time they'll use the Egyptian calendar. When they're under Mesopotamian hegemony, they'll use the Babylonian calendar, or the Mesopotamian calendar. When they're independent, they'll use the Gezer calendar. And they'll flip-flop between the various calendars depending on who's in charge. So the use of calendar here is as much political as anything else. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. John Nichols for $4.99, a non-super chat question. Well, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And I think we'll take Talitha's. Love. And she asks, how does the evidence suggest that Akhenaten died? We have no idea. We don't know. We have no record of... we know how long he lived. We don't know how he died. He wasn't a particularly young man when he came to the throne. He was probably in his 20s, but he wasn't like super young. And he reigned for about 15 years. 15, 17 years, roughly. But we don't actually have any idea how he died. He probably died quite suddenly, because it does seem that there was some awkwardness in the transition. So it looks almost like it was maybe, sudden death, maybe a heart attack, who knows. We're not really sure. But it was pretty fast because the transition between power was smooth. It was smooth. I mean, there was a successor. Semenkhare was definitely a point to be a successor. There was no insurrection during the reign of Semenkhare. It was a peaceful transition, but it does seem to have been something that happened very suddenly. And one of the reasons we think it happened suddenly too was a lot of the stuff from King Tut's tomb was actually unfinished items from the burial, but it was probably the burial of King Akhenaten. So what it looks like happened is Akhenaten planned this elaborate burial. Incredibly elaborate burial. He did make a tomb for himself at Amarna. So Akhenaten made himself a tomb at Amarna, and seems to have. We do have some coffins from other kings. Believe it or not, they were mostly stripped of gold, but we got a good idea of how they were made. They weren't pure gold. Most of the king's coffins had a wood base, and then were covered with gold foil and gemstones. Okay, but Akhenaten planned for himself solid gold coffins. He went overboard. And what it looks like happened was he died before those burial preparations were complete. So it does seem to be a case of sudden death. And then after that, Smenkhare did not finish his coffin and had to be buried. And Tutankhamun essentially just inherited the unfinished mortuary project of Akhenaten and had 10 years to finish it. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and thanks to Josh Nichols for sponsoring that question. Yarad for 441. Thank you very much for the super chat. Questions are the reward, and so is this. God bless. Well, thank you very much, and God bless you too. We do appreciate the support. We appreciate the prayers, and the super chats keep food on our table. So we are, and frankly, the more super chats we get, the sooner I can save up to do this full time. So we thank everyone who supported this channel, and we're so very appreciative. Thank you so very much. Okay, Addison Weir for $4.99. Thank you for the super chat. Are you going to ETS this year? After seeing this year's lineup, I'm really thinking about going. Yes, I'm going. So, yeah, this year I'm going to ETS. So, anyway, there's a chance we could bump into each other there. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. JP for $2. Thank you for the super chat. Do you see any Jewish roots to the sacraments? Yes, there are Jewish roots to the sacraments. It's based on the Passover meal. The bread and the wine. It's the unleavened. Sacraments come right out of that Passover last meal. The last meal of Jesus Christ. Where they're breaking the bread. This is my body which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. That is Christ inserting himself as the Lamb of God of the Passover. And this is my body which is shed for you. Drink this in remembrance of me. Again, that's the remembrance cup of the Passover. So, yes, there's absolutely Jewish roots to the at least the sacrament of communion. There's also Jewish roots to the sacrament of as baptism. Lots of them. It was actually the way, say, baptism developed. It was part of what's called the mikveh, the ritual bathing that Israelites did before they went up into the temple. Okay, and in the beginning, this was this became, say, an extra custom that was added on. You get into, say, the Second Temple period. There was a lot of converts that were coming into Judaism. So they needed a sacrament to initiate, not men, women. This was a problem for women. To be initiated as an Israelite, men had to go through circumcision. Okay, regardless of age. In the case of women, you couldn't do that. So what they did was they took the mikveh and created a ritual bath for women. And that's how women were initiated into Israelite culture. And this happened during the Second Temple period. Well, later on, you then had John the Baptist doing the same thing. Now he's basically saying, okay, he's taking that ritual, that combined Jewish meaning of, say, the ritual bathing of the priests and the initiation of women into Israelite culture, and basically mashing them together and saying, hey, this is the initiation into the new covenant. So this is definitely something that has Jewish roots. I mean, there's no question the sacraments have this. Okay. Which one is? Okay, I see it. Okay, take it at the bottom here. Follow-up question here from Richard Rich B.O.B. Is it true some Second Temple Jews believe that when they ate the Passover, they were eating the same as Moses and everyone else? I don't see that in the text, but again, I'm not an expert on Second Temple Jewish literature. I don't see a sort of a, I don't know, a sort of transubstantiation of sacrament in the Jewish literature. It's possible, but I'm not as familiar on Second Temple literature as I am on, say, Late Bronze literature. So I'd have to probably say I don't know for sure. I haven't seen it though myself. Okay. So interesting question, but we need to talk to someone who's really an expert on Second Temple Judaism to get a good authoritative answer here. So anyway, thank you for that question, and I'm going to have to give this one mostly a pass. Okay. Getting back to where I was. Very active live stream tonight. Really, really active live stream tonight. Wow. We are going to try to get through most of these, okay? So we'll do our best. Okay. All right. So thank you, JP, for that super chat. We really appreciate it. Next super chat here. Yeah, about it. All right. Jack Ray for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Yeah, we're only in at the 8:30 mark. Okay. I'll take this from a bonbon question. How much autonomy did Egyptian scribes have in their work, in the sense of being able to write whatever they wanted? Did they have academic freedom, or were they strictly writing what they were told? Generally, they did not have a lot of academic freedom. They were essentially, basically, they did piecework. So they're making copies, they're making administrative documents, they're calculating the amount of grain that was harvested, they're taxing, going on and doing tax assessments. They're clerks. They're clerks. Essentially, in almost every respect, an Egyptian scribe is a bureaucrat. He's a bureaucrat and he's a clerk. You don't have a lot of academic freedom when you are a bureaucrat. You are serving the bureaucracy. And that's what scribes did. So they would basically take down letters for people. They would copy, say, spells for temples. They would do what the king told them to write on temple walls. They would go on campaign with armies to record how many people were killed, and provide a report back to the king. So they were just simply mostly administrators. So that's what they were. We have records of some of them being used at, say, Deir el-Medina to record letters for other people. So we have that as well. But they were essentially clerks and bureaucrats. So they did what they were told for the most part and what they were paid to do. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, Jack Ray, and thank you for the question, Bon Bon. Okay, Jack Ray, another super chat, Bon Bon super chat. Okie dokie. I'll take this one from Bon Bon again. Why did both Thutmose III deface only Hatshepsut's public monuments, but not destroy other things in private? Would he target everything if he genuinely resented her? No, not necessarily. Some of these other things in private, like particular private tombs, were sort of sacrosanct. Okay, even if you hated a guy like Hatshepsut, you wouldn't go into someone's tomb and hack out the image of Hatshepsut, desecrate a tomb, just to get back at her. Okay, so a lot of this had to do with practicality. Basically, what he was doing here was destroying her public image. So, that's really more his intent here. So if it happened in private, no one would see it, and it had very little impact on her reputation going forward, or her image in the afterlife. So there was really no reason to be that thorough. And we find this even, like, for example, in, say, the damnatio memoriae desecrations of Akhenaten. When Akhenaten desecrates the Amonist temples, he's not being thorough. He's hacking out the image of the god. He's hacking out the name of Amun-Re. But he's not getting rid of every instance. It's not thorough in that sense. It's just representative. So there was no need under that belief to get rid of every image. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, Jack Ray. I really appreciate it, and thank you for the question. Okay. Jack Ray for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Sponsor any question. Wow, Jack Ray's going full tilt with the sponsors tonight. Okay, I'll take this one from, again, Talitha Kum. Is Moses' Cushite wife Numbers 12:1 Zipporah or someone else? It's someone else. Zipporah is a Midianite. The wife in question here is a Cushite. Why were Miriam and Aaron angry at Moses in connection with her? Numbers 12:1-2. And why was only Miriam cursed? Numbers 10-16. Okay. This is... Right, there's a little bit of geopolitics happening here, okay? Regional politics. Much of, say, the goodwill that Moses had in the Sinai was because of his marriage to Zipporah. And Zipporah's a Midianite. She's not a Cushite. So what's going to happen here is Aaron and Miriam are angry. They're angry at Moses for breaking this sort of clan agreement. So this becomes more of a spitting match over who is hearing God. So they are challenging, presumably, Moses got permission to marry this Cushite from God. And they're contesting that. They're not happy about this break in alliance. They're contesting this marriage and they walk into the tent, into the tabernacle, to assert that, hey, we listen to God too. You're not the only one who listens to God. And so that's basically, that's in Numbers, the wrong book. Numbers, okay. What's that, Numbers? Yeah, okay, Numbers 10. No, that's the wrong passage. 12. Okay, there it is. Okay. So you notice in verse 2, okay, verse 1. Then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. Okay, so this is not a racist thing, by the way. This is a clan alliance. This is a tribal alliance thing. And they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well? And we've jumped to verse 4. And suddenly the Lord said to Moses and Aaron and to Miriam, you three come out of the tent of meeting. And the three came out. This is the reason she's actually struck down with leprosy. She went into the tent of meeting. She was not allowed to go in the tent of meeting. This was for only priests. And priests were only men in those days. You know, only priests were allowed to go into the tabernacle. So she goes into the tabernacle. She's committed, she's doubted Moses' word here, and she's basically violated one of the precepts of tabernacle ritual. That's why she gets struck with leprosy. So that's sort of what's going on here. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and I hope that helps. Yeah, this is a commonly confused passage. People will often think it's about her skin color or her race. It has nothing to do with that. This is about tribal allegiance, tribal covenants, and basically who can speak for God on behalf of God. So anyway, thank you for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay, another one from Jack Ray here for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Sponsor another bonbon question. Okay. Bonbon's looking out here. Let's see if I can find another bonbon question. Take this one here. Did ancient Egyptians have riots in Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom before the first workers' strike? If so, what would they riot about? Where would they do this? And if they lived in villages mainly and government wouldn't see them? Okay. We have no records of any riots taking place before the first workers' strike in Dynasty 20. That's the first instance we see of it. Now, there could have been riots prior, especially with sequestered villages when the supply of food stops. And it's always over the supply of food. That's where riots take place, is over food insecurity. So if you know that, you can kind of figure out when riot could have occurred, but we don't have any record of any others prior to that. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, Jack Ray, and thank you for the question, Bonbon. BC for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thoughts on the prophecies against Tyre? Were they fulfilled even though they were not personally done by Nebuchadnezzar but by Alexander? That's a good question, because it might have been actually done by Nebuchadnezzar. We've got 2 tablets that date to the time of Nebuchadnezzar. Cuneiform tablets. One mentions that they were getting equipped to go invade Tyre. The second one talks about Tyre as a Babylonian province. Okay? So there does seem to be some indication that Nebuchadnezzar actually did invade, break down the wall of Tyre, and, you know, do his pillaging and normal Babylonian stuff there. So I do think there's actually strong evidence for Nebuchadnezzar actually having fulfilled the prophecy. Now, it also says in the prophecy that many nations will rise up against Tyre. So that's not, Alexander coming against Tyre would be part of that fulfillment. So this isn't just a single invasion. It's a series of invasions. And it started by Nebuchadnezzar, from all appearances. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Jack Ray for $5 again. Thank you very much for that super chat. Another bonbon question. Okay. Another bonbon question. Okay, I'll take this one here. Why was there a democratization of things related to the afterlife during the Second Intermediate Period in Egypt, as the Book of the Dead had become widespread, not only for royalty, but courtiers and other officials as well? Actually, the process of democratization of things related to the afterlife happens long before then. Actually, it starts at the end of the Middle Kingdom. This is when we start seeing royals and courtiers start building their own mastabas. Before that point, before, say, Dynasty 6, mastabas were something that kings did. Kings make themselves mastabas, and then finally the first pyramids, and courtiers would have themselves buried in shaft tombs around the pyramid. In Dynasty 6, the courtiers and the nobles start building themselves mastabas, just like the kings of old. So there's a lot of democratization that happens at that point. During the Middle Kingdom, we see the coffin texts. These are basically copies of the pyramid texts that were written in the pyramids and placed upon the coffins of the courtiers. That's another democratization. We also see the institution of, say, both Ba and Ka happen around the Middle Kingdom as well, whereas prior to that, it was only believed that the king had a Ba. So we do see a progression of democratization of things concerning the afterlife from essentially the end of the Old Kingdom all the way up until the Roman period. So anyway, thank you very much for that question, and thank you, Jack Ray, for sponsoring that question. Okay, Jack Ray for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Sponsor any question. Okay, any question. Who's got a question? Let me see if I can find one that's interesting. I want to take a non-bonbon one here, though, because... Alright, I'll take this loose sendable one. Hello, Dr. Falk. Do you have an educated guess where Adam and Eve lived? Yes, I do. I believe they lived in Mesopotamia. Okay? And that's because the four rivers that are mentioned are basically Mesopotamian rivers. And that's sort of where Eden seems to have been cordoned off, is in Mesopotamia. You have the Euphrates and the Tigris, and we know where those are. You have the Gihon, and we actually have some idea where that is now. And there's that has been revealed by satellite photos. Okay. It also mentions that one of the rivers surrounds the entire area of Kish, and Kish was a region in Mesopotamia. So it seems to have been in the southern Mesopotamian area. Now, exactly where in the southern Mesopotamian area, that's a little dicey. And part of the reason is we know that sea levels have risen and flooded a lot of, say, the Mesopotamian Delta. We've actually know that the coast of the Mesopotamian Delta has has moved inland. So a lot of those areas have been, say, basically overwhelmed with water. So that would be my guess of where it would have been, is in that Mesopotamian area. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for the super chat, Jack Ray. Okay, and the next one here. Next question here is from BC for $5. Thank you very much for that super chat. We hear a lot about tens, 100s, 1000s, but also 3s, 7s, and 12s. Did the Hebrews have a base 10 system? What about other ancient Near Eastern cultures? Yes. The Israelites had a base 10 system. So they did count in tens, hundreds, thousands, etc. The Mesopotamians had two systems. They had a base 10 system and a base 60 system. And the base 60 system was used primarily for mathematics. It was a really, really easy way for them to do trigonometry. Yes, the Mesopotamians had the Pythagorean theorem 900 years before Pythagoras. So they could do trigonometry. And we have cuneiform tablets that show them doing this. So, it was really sophisticated because, they could just, count the degrees, and they just divided the circle into 60 degrees. This is why we have 60 minutes on a clock, by the way. That's the Mesopotamian system. That's the Mesopotamian system just applied to timekeeping. So, yeah, so that's what we know. The Egyptians also had a base 10 system as well. So, most of the time, base 10 systems were more practical, except for in the theory field of mathematics. And this is, as I said, Mesopotamians had both base 10 and base 60. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. What? Yeah, well. Daniel, Roar of the Logos for $4.99. Thank you for the super chat. Sponsor a question. Take Harry Starks here. Are we living in the end times? Yes. But are we living in the end times? That's the question. Here's basically when Christ comes back, he says, in these last days. So everyone in the New Testament thought they were writing in the last days. The last days start with the resurrection. That's when the last days start. The question is, are we living in the end times? Basically, the consummation. And that we have to wait and see, because nobody knows exactly how that's going to unfold. Jesus will say, I will come as a thief in the night. No man knows the day or the hour. So It's not even going to be easy to identify even when we are in the midst of it. Times are going to suck. That's about all we know. Okay? Just don't let yourself be deceived. If anyone says they know, they don't know. Period. No man knows the day or the hour. If any man says Christ is up in the attic, don't go. If anyone says Christ is in the desert, don't go. For as lightning flashes in the east is seen in the west, so shall be the coming of the Son of the Man. Basically, when Christ returns, you're not going to need to guess. It'll be obvious. No guessing's going to be involved here. So anyway, I want to thank Roar of the Daniel Roar of the Line for that super chat, and thank Harry for the question. Jack Ray for $5. Sponsor a Bonbon question. Thank you very much for the super chat. All right, Bonbon. Let's see. I should have tracked that one. 840. Another Bonbon question. Okay, we'll take this one here. Which social class or strata in Egypt did the most innovative work? For instance, who invented and improved the improved chariots that Thutmose used to build an empire? The priest, a military man, scribe. The first chariots were actually adapted by the Amoritic people of the Hyksos. They were the ones who did it. And as far as we know, the Hyksos did not have strata as a stratified society. It's only the Egyptians that had that stratified society. So, there was a lot more innovation that was done in Avaris to make the chariots suitable for Egyptian warfare. So there was a lot of customization of these things for the particular conditions that they were doing this warfare in under. So, it's hard to say who did the most innovative work. There would have been innovations by various people for various things. You would have had, say, I mean, you did have physicians that were, say, part of the craftsman class. So, physicians were kind of one of those weird kind of positions that they did a lot of medical innovation. So they would experiment with plants, animals to see what would promote cures. So there was a lot of actual medical innovation that was done in Egypt. Like, for example, the Edwin Smith papyrus is massive. It's a big papyrus. So they did a lot of innovation. So a lot of it's going to be depend on what exactly they're trying to innovate. You know, you did have scribes that had to innovate special techniques to build the pyramids. You know, so that took innovation. A lot of hydrologic engineering in Egypt. There would be planners and scribes to do that too. So there was a lot of various. It was a culture that invented a lot of things. So it's hard to say exactly which class here would be the most innovative because various classes did specialize in certain things. I mean, you'd have scribes innovating different things than you'd have, say, for example, say physicians or even craftsmen. So anyway, thank you very much for that question. I hope that helped. And thank you very much for the sponsored super chat. Okay, another sponsored bonbon question from Jack Ray. Thank you very much for the super chat. Let's see, go down this time. I don't know. I mean, I don't even know how many more bonbon. Is bonbon still generating questions? Well, okay. We'll take this one at 8:54. I'm gonna have two stamps here. One to keep track of bonbon questions and one to keep track of the super chats. Okay. Bonbon asks, what type of books would typically be held in libraries in ancient Egypt, say starting around 1600 BCE and onwards? Okay. Egypt did not have, they had scriptoria. They did not have libraries. Okay. They wouldn't have libraries until basically the Greeks come rolling through. That's when you get your first library, is the Library of Alexandria. Okay. But you did find in that library, you did find various books, literature, histories, magical spells. Prior to that, say 1600 BC, the scriptoria would have correspondence. It would have contracts. It would have liturgies, spell books. So they were more the scriptoria of, say, temples would be more of a religious focus. The scriptoria of, say, palaces would have a more administrative focus. And these weren't public. So a person off the street couldn't just walk in and just look at a text. You had to be someone who was of that class to be able to access those scriptoria. So it would really depend upon what was the function of the building it served. Was it a religious function? Was it an administrative function? Was it a royal function? So, that's what's going to matter as to what the content of those libraries held in, say, 1600 BC. So, anyway, and frankly, the only scriptoria we would have probably around 1600 BC would have been the scriptorium at Avaris. Some small temples would have had them too, and basically the royal palace of the 17th dynasty would have had probably one as well, and that would have been in Thebes. So anyway, thank you for the question, and thank you, Jack Ray, for sponsoring the question. Okay, we have one here from Jack Ray for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Sponsor any question. Awesome. Let's see what we got. Okay, I'll take this one here. Let me explain followers of the shepherd. And he asks, in Revelation 14:14, Jesus is depicted with a sickle. Does this have an Old Testament connotation? It's got an agricultural connotation. Let me show you what that connotation is. All right, so we'll first read it. Revelation 14:14. And I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and sitting on the cloud was one like a son of man, having a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. And it goes on, and another angel came out of the temple, crying out in a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, put in your sickle and reap, because the hour to reap has come, because the harvest of the earth is ripe. Okay. It's an agricultural metaphor. The sickle is an instrument of agriculture. You use it to reap the wheat. This actually harkens back to one of the parables of Jesus, which is the wheat and the tares. Go flip to that one. And it's Matthew 13. So it's harkening back to that. He presented another parable to them, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went away. But when the wheat sprang up and bore grain, then the tares became evident also. And the slave of the landowner came and said to him, 'Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares?' And he said to them, 'An enemy has done this.' And the slave says, 'Do you want us to go and gather them up?' Verse 29, 'No, lest you are gathering up the tares, you may root up the wheat with them. Allow both to grow together until the harvest. And in the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, first gather up the tares, bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn.'" They're taking it out both together. Okay, so they're taking the wheat and the tares together. What's going to separate them is the winnowing process. So that's the meaning of the metaphor here. It's an agricultural metaphor, meaning the time is right to collect the wheat and the tares. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for the sponsorship of the question, Jack. So, gone. BC for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Sponsoring crafty veterans question regarding the reliability of Christianity, textual transmission, etc. Okay. Way up, huh? Let me get that timestamp first.
The actual question was, what would you say to an atheist who claims, "I can't believe in Christianity because the Bible was written by many thousands of years ago"? What's changed?
Okay, here's the question. What would you say to an atheist who claims, "I can't believe in Christianity because the Bible was written by men thousands of years ago and was changed over time"? Okay, well, first of all, the evidence here is pretty thin that, I mean, we have minor textual changes like diction, grammar, that sort of thing. But the main message does not seem to have changed much over thousands of years. And frankly, we've got a lot of text documents that can be used to show that, you know, there was a base text underneath all this. And that can be discovered consistently. So there's really two objections here, okay? Two objections. The first objection, it was written by men thousands of years ago. And it's the ad antiquatum argument. Essentially, you can't believe it because it's old. Well, that's not good reasoning. You know, just because a belief is old or new doesn't mean it's wrong. So, I mean, it's pretty bad thinking to start that way. Now, whether or not it's changed over time, that's a more serious argument. And that's because it's trying to attack the reliability of it. But then again, too, these are hand-copied documents. Of course, there's going to be changes that come in through scribal error, through updating of diction and language. That doesn't mean, though, that it was necessarily radically changed. Only that it means it was subtly changed. You know, and frankly, I mean, I know they use the game of telephone here, but we also have a problem with that, say, metaphor, which is that the game of telephone doesn't rely on a mnemonic device. Writing is a mnemonic device. It's used to make something permanent. And because it was used to make the writing permanent, we can figure out where any changes could have taken place. And frankly, this process of text criticism is used in our best critical editions of the Bible, like the Nestle Land. So scholars use this technique all the time to establish what was the underlying, most likely the underlying text. And we have discovered, most of the things that we've discovered in doing this process is very little content has been changed. You know, occasionally a number has been changed here and there, occasionally a word has been. But the overall message has been remarkably consistent over thousands of years. Very remarkably consistent. More consistent than we find in any other ancient documents. So, yeah, you know, so that is something we have to really consider here. And like when we talk about, for example, like the New Testament, we've got 5,000 texts to compare. So we have like 99% guaranteed as close to the original using the text critical methods. So if anything, it's shown remarkable reliability because of its text stability over time. Like even, say, the Masoretic text, incredibly stable. It's probably the most stable collection of Hebrew manuscripts that we find. There's very little difference between the Masoretic readings of, say, the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic readings of, say, the Aleppo Codex. So that's how I would respond to this question. The fact is, you know, people make up new lies all the time. So just because something is old doesn't mean it's unreliable. In the same way, just because it's been subtly changed for language, diction, etc., you know, also does not mean it's unreliable. In fact, the stability of the message has been remarkable. So anyway, thank you for the question, and I want to thank that sponsored Super Chat. Okay, next one here from JP for $2. Thank you very much for the Super Chat. Thoughts on The Great Divorce from C.S. Lewis? Haven't read it, so I can't say. I really don't know what the book is about. Haven't read it. I haven't read a lot of C.S. Lewis. I've read his Mere Christianity. I've read, tried to read his Out of the Silent Planet. Read his Screw Tape Letters. Everyone loves Screw Tape Letters. The Screw Tape Letters are awesome. So, I think there's a lot here that's that could be said, but unfortunately, I'm not in a position to actually comment on The Great Divorce because I haven't read it. So anyway, thank you for the Super Chat, and I'm going to have to give this one a pass. Jack Ray for $5. Thank you very much for the Super Chat. Sponsor a bonbon question. Okay, where do we leave off with the bonbon? At $8.50. Okay, bonbon. Let's see where you giving us on your next question. Okay, there's the one for 854. I'll take this one here. We don't generally talk about politics. We try to keep this channel apolitical. But Bonbon asks a question here. Which political system is the most promoted, considered generally correct, optimal in the Torah and Jewish sources? Critarchy, ruled by judges, monarchy, etc. are discussed, but what's the best? Okay. One of the things we have to understand here is that Torah is creating basically a way of living in the promised land for the Israelites. And that's generally going to be a theocracy until they institute a monarchy. Okay. However, Torah does not seem to view monarchy as optimal. And even the Critarchy wasn't optimal. Because remember, it is the failure of the judges that ends up leading to the institution of the monarchy. Essentially, the Torah doesn't actually have an opinion on this. Yes, it has a theocratic center for the Israelites, but really for no one else. So it doesn't have an opinion here. So unfortunately, this is one of those questions where the Bible just does not speak. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for that question. Thank you for the sponsorship of the question. Very, very much appreciated. Yes, I do. All right. Okay, we were at... Let's see here. 45. This camel leopard. Trying to find my place again here. Okay, there it is. All right. 45, 2. Jack Ray for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Sponsor another bonbon question. Okie dokie. Oh boy, I think we got a theme tonight. This is the bonbon show. So anyway, go back down to 857. Okay, Bonbon asks at 9:05. Why do Israelites seem to have more Babylonian influence on their calendar as opposed to Egyptian influence, which we might expect them to? It all boils down to hegemony when they were put into exile. Say, for example, the books of Kings and Chronicles were really collated after the Babylonian exile. So those final reigns of the kings where there's more Babylonian and Assyrian control, you're going to get more use of the Mesopotamian calendar. So that's why you see it more. You do see the Egyptian calendar, however, used. For example, it's used after Josiah is overthrown by Nicholas II. What? I did catch you on film, yes. I didn't know you were coming back. Okay, so anyway, that's the reason why we find the Mesopotamian calendar used at this point. All right. So anyway, thank you for the question, and I want to thank Jack Ray for sponsoring that question. Okay, 845. Jack Ray for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Sponsor any question. Okay. Harry Stark, are there any theological differences between David and Kiara? Yes. She leans more towards Arminianism. I lean more towards Calvinism. Okay. There you go. That's probably the major theological difference we have. Okay, so anyway, thank you for the question, and thank you for the sponsored super chat.
David is a compliment.
It could be. BC just said David is a complementarian, Kira is not. Could be. You never know. Could be. All right, BC for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Controversy time. Oh, we always love that. That always brings lots of fun. If there was no death in the world before the fall, what was the purpose of the tree of life? Well, there was probably death of some kind before the fall. Was it the death of the first humans? That's the question. So basically, there would have been death of some kind. They would have known about death. Because as soon as Adam and Eve picked a leaf off of a tree, it would have withered and died because it was no longer being fed by the tree. Whatever they would have eaten would have died in their digestive system. Okay? So, so there would have been some death before the fall. But in this particular case, the death that's really important here is the death of the first human. And that's really what sort of matters here, is what is the position of mortality for humanity in the garden. So the purpose of the tree of life was to give them an abundance of life. They might have been immortal already. The problem was, what the tree of life does was make you permanently immortal. So there is no chance of the body dying. So it's basically a way of doubling down on that decision. So if they had eaten of the tree of life, they would have been immortal without restriction, without condition. They would have made the choice, and that would have been the end of the matter. And who knows, at that point, it's highly possible that if Adam and Eve had eaten of the tree of life, they could have also eaten from the tree of the knowledge of the fruit of good and evil. Because one of the things about the narrative is, the narrative does say that, behold, man has come to know good and evil like we do. Well, how do they know it? Because they have the knowledge. But they have the knowledge that's already predicated on, say, eternal life. So it's possible that if they had eaten the tree of life first, they could have eaten of the knowledge of good and evil later, and been mortal, but immortal, and have the knowledge, but be sinless. They just got it in the wrong order. And because it was done out of order, condemnation fell upon them. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. All right. Sponsor any question by Jack Ray for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Okay, let me explain followers of the shepherd. Okay? And he asks, why do many believe mankind existed before Adam and Eve when the Bible states that Eve came from Adam's rib? Could this merely be metaphorical? Uh, this one is an I'm not sure. Okay? There are people who do believe that mankind existed for Adam and Eve. And they would say in this case that there was a special creation of Adam above, say, the mankind existing. The mankind before Adam were not truly human. They were not ethical creatures. They're not moral creatures. They're not saddled with that choice of good and evil. So, and a lot of this again is going to be predicated on the theory of evolution and say the age of the Earth. Okay, so that is going to much depend on this. Now, could go either way on this one. Honestly, could this be metaphorical? Maybe. Could this be a special creation of Eve? Could be. It's hard to say. It's really hard to say. A little more context might be helpful, but there's exegetes are going to differ on this one. Biblical interpreters are going to be all over the map on this one. Some will say metaphorical. Some say it's a recapitulation of ancient Near Eastern mythology. Some will say that it's that, you know, this is something that actually happened. So again, it's really going to depend on who you ask, and I don't have an opinion on this. So anyway, thank you for the question, and thanks to Jack Ray for sponsoring that question. Okay, Jack Ray for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Sponsor a bonbon question. Okay, another bonbon question. I'll put a timestamp here. Next one was at 9:05. Okie okay, I'll take this one. Can you explain how one could contract business activities without pharaonic involvement? Since the pharaoh basically had to sponsor every major project, how is business conducted? It's a barter economy. Egypt was a barter economy. So you had to make goods and trade for them. So goods and services were commonly traded between parties. It was you traded shoes and wine for maybe a box and a sack of grain, and you'd basically come together and trade various items until you got the satisfactory trade. So the entire economy of Egypt was not entirely dependent upon Pharaoh. The king sponsors the major projects like temples, tombs, that sort of thing. The tomb of the king, of course. But everyone else had to pay for their own tomb. You know, when a nobleman had to make a tomb, he had to buy his own tomb. He had to contract with craftsmen to get it done, and he had to pay for that himself. So, with that said, a lot of business and a lot of economic activity can just happen through barter. So anyway, thank you for that question. Very, very much appreciated. And thank you for the sponsorship of that question. Right, another bonbon question from Jack Ray. Thank you very much for the super chat. Okay. We'll take this one. It's 908. Why was Sobekneferu hailed as the savior of Egypt when Egypt collapsed into the second intermediary period during after her reign? It clearly seems that she didn't do such a good job. This is what's called putting a brave face on things. Okay? Yeah, the 12th dynasty was falling apart. There's no question about it. The reign of Amenhotep or Amenhotep IV produced no viable children. Sobekneferu was the only viable option. So yeah, this is basically you put a brave face on it until the next guy takes over, essentially. So that's all that's going on here. Is it's just sort of propaganda, just to make sure it just like the people don't panic and lose faith in their institutions. And there was a huge bureaucracy during Dynasty 12. Huge bureaucracy. So it was in their best interest to put a good face on this. So they knew it was circling down the drain. And it led to a lot of instability during, say, the 13th dynasty. However, in this particular case, she probably did the best she could. Her reign wasn't horrible. It just showed that the whole kingdom was in decline. And declining dynasties, this often happened with the declining dynasties. Declining dynasties often failed to produce male heirs, and thus ended up with a female ruler at the end. So, yeah, this is just sort of normal for declining dynasties in Egypt. So, again, during these declining dynasties too, they tend to try to put a brave face on things so it doesn't look so bad and so bleak. So anyway, and a lot of these we have to understand too. These are religious inscriptions. Okay, these are religious inscriptions. They are meant to be offerings to gods. You don't put bad news on offerings to gods. You only put good news on offerings to gods. This is like the unblemished lamb. You don't give God a blemished lamb. In Egypt, you don't give Egyptian gods bad news. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for the sponsorship of the question. 851. All right, 852. Jack Ray for $5 sponsoring the Bonbon question. Okie dokie. Off at 908, so flip down to 908. And Bomod asks, why does Egyptian art not use perspective, and why are their temples in general so lacking in ornamentation? Okay. That's two questions. Why did they not use perspective? Because they were basically doing the writing on stone. It's really, really difficult to do perspective on stone. So they're carving this stuff into stone, so it's very, very difficult to get that perspective. And how they got closer to perspective was using low relief. And we do actually have a few paintings on papyrus, or not on papyrus, but on tombs, on plaster, that attempt to use perspective. They're not good at it, but they do attempt to use it. Like there's a tomb, and the fragment of the tomb is in the British Museum, and actually shows three singers, and one of them is drawn in perspective. So they did know about perspective. So but it wasn't. It's not something that was easy to do with the materials they had. Okay, now, why are the temples lacking in ornamentation? They weren't. They were highly decorated. Uh, Besides the low relief of the carvings, they were also painted. And you go to you can see some of the paint still preserved at temples like at Medina Habu, the mortuary temple of Ramses III. There's still paint preserved there. If you want to see what it would look like closer to when it was new, go to Dendara Temple, and you just see beautiful, spectacular paint on the walls. I mean, these were highly decorated, very, very beautifully done paintings. So these were not meant to be just the carving of the reliefs alone, but carving of the reliefs with paint. And they were very, very colorful. Absolutely gorgeous. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat to Jack Ray, and thank you very much for the question. BC for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do we have clear examples of fulfilled prophecy where the text was very, very clearly written before the events came to pass? If so, what's your favorite? My favorite is actually the prophecy of Cyrus the Great. Now, in that particular case, the prophecy was written around the 8th century BC. Yeah, there's a lot of scholars that post-date it. But there's really no reason to. Cyrus was a known name at the time. Cyrus the First had been contemporary with the prophet Isaiah. And there's pretty sound evidence to suggest that this was, I mean, even the documentary hypothesis. You know, Wellhausen used to say, prophets before Pentateuch. So, you know, text critical scholars have been very, very transparent, at least about early dating of, and many of them believe that Isaiah came before the Pentateuch. So I don't think there's any reason to doubt that. But it's very clear from that you know, Isaiah is predicting that the Messiah, or the savior of the people from their exile is going to be Cyrus, a guy named Cyrus, and it was Cyrus II freed the Israelites. But there's other messianic prophecies as well. Not all prophecy, though, we have to be careful. Not all prophecy is meant to predict the future. In fact, the vast majority of it doesn't. The vast majority of prophecy is meant to show what's happening in your time. So to make things clear, to give people a sense of the times they're living in. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated, and I hope that helped. Now, we are kind of buzzing a little quick tonight here because we got actually so many questions and so many super chats. We're trying to get them all in. So, and regardless, I am going to quit at midnight. So that's as late as I'm going to go. So just to give you all a heads up, because I do have to go to work tomorrow. So I'm going to cut it off at midnight regardless. So just so everyone knows. All right. Jack Ray for $5. Sponsor a bonbon question. That's 54. So we got 908. Unless I get some context there, I really can't say anything about it. I haven't read, he might want that, but unless I have the text, I can't read it. I mean, it would take probably 10 minutes to look that up. Tell him to ask next week. By a bonbon? Uh, a bonbon on that Wife of Ammon, Book of the Dead, 17. Restate that question next week, so I actually have some time to look that one up. I can't comment on a text I haven't read. So, or at least not one that I haven't read recently. So, I'll answer the question, but you're going to have to restate it next week. Okay. Bonbon, what are your thoughts on Neoplatonism and its influence on Christian doctrine? Do you think the one universal intellect, universal soul distinction with different spheres works theologically? Not very well. There is some allusions to Platonism in the New Testament. At least the Pythagorean school. Like, for example, John 1:1. The word being the logos being as something that's often used in Platonic literature. Neoplatonism seems to be much more influential on Gnosticism than it is actually on, say, Christianity. So, I mean, while Neoplatonism was sort of part of the background of the biblical texts, it wasn't highly influential. It had some influence, but not much. So that's sort of my thought on this. Now, a lot of church fathers were highly influenced by Neoplatonism. And that's how they sort of came up with the semi-Arian theory, is because of their relationship to Platonic and Aristotelian thought. So, I do have, I mean, I don't buy Neoplatonism, so for me, it's just not really even an issue, but it's just, I don't think it works that well theologically. Okay. Okay, I will take, that's a 1035, 3. Okay. We'll take that as the next bonbon question then. All right. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question, and thank you for Jack Ray for sponsoring it. Okay, we have one here. Yeah. We have a sticker from BC for $5 Australian. Plus one bunny cookie. Love it. The bunny will enjoy that. Thank you very much for that super chat. We really appreciate the contribution, and my bunny will enjoy it too. She loves her bunny cookies. So thank you very much for the super chat. Okay, 855. Sponsor a bonbon question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Let's go to the bottom here. And we go to 1033. Okay. Did inequality between men and women in Egypt increase during the later or after the reign of Ramses II, as we see titles like the wife of Ammon not being as powerful as before? Well, women had a lot of rights in Egypt. A lot of rights in Egypt. And the priesthoods of, say, cults like the cult of Mut were also very important. Now, it is true that, say, the cult of Mut, which was considered to be the wife of Ammon, and we have to be careful here because there's two wives of Ammon. Ammon had two wives. We had Amenet, which is his early wife, and she gets put away in favor of Mut. Mut's the hussy that she's the homewrecker. Okay. She comes in and she starts her own cult in the Karnak precinct. and she's very much sponsored during the time. Her cult is very much sponsored during the time of, say, Amenhotep III. So you could even call that an elevation of the status of, say, a priestess cult, because the cult of Mut was almost entirely a priestess cult. There are no men involved, as far as we can tell. So I don't think this is a decline in status, just more or less a decline in sponsorship. We would have seen, like, the wife of Amon would have played a very important role, say, during the reign of Hatshepsut, where she is filling that role herself. And her daughter is going to fill that role. But during the time of Thutmose III, he's going to place his royal patronage behind the cult of Ammon, not his wife, because that's who's more important in his cultic sphere. So anyway, this is not something that declines. It's just goes different, and the cult of Mut remains into the late period. Or sorry, the cult of Mut. Yeah, the cult of Mut remains into the late period. So anyway, thank you very much for that question, and thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated. I'm going to take a brief 5-minute break here, and I will be right back. Okay, I'm back. Let's see here. Okie dokie. So our next super chat is somewhere around 8:55. Scroll all the way back up. Yeah, I don't think there's any way we're going to get through all these tonight, honestly. But first come, first serve, and we will take super chats over. So 8:55 here. So okay, we stopped with that one. So the next one here is Jack Ray for $5. Another bonbon question. 6. And we left off at 9:08 for bonbon. And
He posted another one that he wants. Bottom.
okay.
Why did rational wisdom skepticism emerge in the Middle Kingdom? Egypt. Why did it disappear by 1100s?
Why did rationalism, skepticism emerge in the Middle Kingdom, Egypt, and why did it disappear by the 1100s? Harper songs, almost atheistic, questioning the Athenite, inverting tradition, but ends with Iresh's text. I would not say that was skepticism or rationalism. Egyptian poets did idealize religion sometimes. So they would sometimes, if we were to compare this to, say, Greek philosophy, there was sort of the difference between the common practice of religion and the god of the philosophers, where God was kind of idealized. Egyptians did the same thing. And particularly in some poetic works, God was idealized. So they weren't monotheist, and they weren't being skeptic, but they were idealizing and sort of reducing the whole polytheistic system down to calling it a god, or God in the singular. So this is not an atheistic text. Now, they did sometimes speculate on what happened in the afterlife, especially in say poetic and wisdom works, but that's not the same as being rationalistic or skeptic. So we want to be careful here, because that's just not how they thought back then. You see, to the Egyptian mindset, the existence of the gods was self-evident. You could look up in the sky and see Newt on any clear night, which was almost every night in Egypt. But at the same time, too, like everyone else, they wondered what exactly would wait for them in the afterlife. I mean, they knew the stories, but what did that look like? So they were apt to ask that question. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and thank you, Jack Ray, for sponsoring. So we can basically summarize here that it's not atheistic. It's idealistic. And that's different. Okay? So, thank you very much for the question, and thank you, Jack Ray, for sponsoring that question. Okay, and we're back to 856. Okay, we got another one here and again, Jack Ray sponsoring another Bonbon question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Wow. All right, so that was at 857. Go back to 908. Yeah, I'm having to use timestamps here to figure out where everything is. I'm having to keep track of both Jack Ray's super chats here and Bonbon's questions. All right, I'll take this one, 915. Did evil exist before the fall from the Garden of Eden? Because the snake was still there trying to lead Adam away from God. Blessed be he, which might be evil. If so, where did evil come from? Awesome. That's a great question. The fact is that Ezekiel 20 tells us that that the serpent was in the garden. He was a covering cherubim. He was basically a throne cherubim. And then iniquity was found in him. Okay? So there wasn't evil. He hadn't actually done anything. He had set his mind to do evil, but he hadn't actually sinned yet. So this is the first rebellion, and Michael Heiser talks about the several rebellions in the world or in the universe. You had the fall of man, then you had the fall of the angels, and then you had the Tower of Babel as sort of the third great rebellion. So it basically starts here with the fall. Fall of Adam, fall of Eve, and the fall of the serpent, where he is then struck down to the ground. And as I said, Ezekiel 20 makes it clear that he was perfect. He was made perfect until iniquity was found in him, and then he was cast down. And we see that cast down happening in Genesis 3. So there was no evil prior to this. This is where evil begins. It's a kind of theodicy, explaining the origin of evil. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and I'm glad we could answer that question, and thank you, Jack Ray, for the super chat. $57. Okay. I saw that. Okay, BC for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. I heard a claim that Yahweh has to do with Inhale, exhale. Any thoughts? Yeah, it's nonsense. Total nonsense. uh, yeah, its origin is pretty clear. It's the verb. It's a secondary tense of the verb to be, and I don't think there's any really serious debate about that anymore. But no, the idea of this inhale, exhale is just complete baloney. So anyway, I mean, how do you even entertain a question like that? You can make any word. I mean, any sort of Hebrew, word be like that. So it's just kind of crazy. So anyway, this is an etymological argument that has no merit at all. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And yeah, that's my thoughts on this. Jack Ray again, sponsored Bonbon question. Thank you very much for the super chat. 15. Check something else here. I also want to take it to opportunity to also thank one of our other channel sponsors, Slade Neighbors, who gave us a really generous super chat of $300. So I want to thank you very much, Slade, for your sponsorship for this channel. We really appreciate it. Okay. So go down to 15 here. All right. Bonbon asks 1907. I should record that timestamp too. Would you agree with the implication that Nichols of Cusa makes that a major issue with Adam's response was the implication that God was responsible for the introduction of impurity into Eden? Well, it is very true that he does shift the blame. Adam very much shifts the blame. He shifts it onto God and he shifts it onto the woman. I mean, he's passing the blame game around all over the place. He's basically fleeing the mud and hoping something sticks. So, yeah, he definitely blames God. And he blames the woman. Great way to start a relationship. So I would agree with Nichols of Cusa there. It is very true though that Eve was deceived, but also Adam was disobedient. So once he's caught, he's spreading the blame. So yeah, I think that is a major issue with his response. I don't think it significantly changes what his judgment would have been. I think that would have happened regardless. But it doesn't. It's not a good look for him. Just not a good look. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and thank you, Jack Ray, for the super chat. Nine. How many of these questions did you sponsor tonight? What? Oh, so Jack, you said this is the equivalent of waterboarding me. Well, Um, not quite sure what to make of that. All right, so we'll sponsor another bonbon question here. So, just went too far. All right, I'll take this one here from Bonbon. What was the most philosophical text in Egyptian literature? How did they distribute this literature and later pornography to common Egyptians? Was it on walls or through speech or papyrus? Okay, it was through papyrus. And the most philosophical text we find in Egyptian literature is, say, the Book of Thoth. And you can find a version of this published by Richard Jasnow. And it is sort of the trajectory of the Thoth cult that ultimately becomes the Hermes Trismegistus cults. So that's probably the most philosophical text. And it's coming out of the tradition of, say, student-teacher questioning. We also find very philosophical texts in the Ramesside period in the Leiden papyri as well. So, I would definitely recommend, say the Book of Thoth as being sort of your foundational philosophical Egyptian literature. Again, it's got a religious bent. Every piece of literature in Egypt has a religious bent. But that's as close as you get to philosophical literature from native Egyptian sources. And they were all copied onto papyri and distributed on papyri. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, Jack Ray. And thank you for the question, Bonbon. Okay, here's what we're going to do at this point. In fairness to our other super chatters, it's 11 o'clock right now. We're going to take some of the other, Bonbon's had a lot of questions tonight. In fairness to some of our other questioners, we're going to take the non-Bonbon stuff. And if we have time, we'll continue down the Bonbon rabbit trail, okay? So we just want to make sure that everyone who did do a proper super chat didn't get drowned out by all the Bonbon questions. So we're just going to do this in fairness because we do want to at least recognize every super chat. Does that sound like a fair plan?
Says that's fair. Bonbon says that's not fair.
That's not Bonbon. Of course, Bonbon would say that's not fair.
You got a lot to say.
Oh, Bonbon, you've been well treated tonight. Well treated. Okay. So let's go down and let's see. Oh, we were taking that one. I want to make sure everyone at least gets thanked. We might not answer all the questions, but we want to make sure everybody gets thanked.
Questions.
All right, here we go. Mr. B.O.B. 918. Yeah, then at midnight I go to bed. Yeah. How many hours was the Egyptian work day? It was usually around 10 hours. Okay. How much of their duties were what we would consider chores? A fair portion of it, basically whatever time they had left, about four-ish hours in the day, would be left on chores. Was the average workday that hard? It could be excruciatingly hard and dangerous. Okay? It depends what you did. If you were a scribe, life was good. Scribes had basically, they were basically paper pushers. So scribes had a very comfortable life. Farmers had a very hard life. Those who built pyramids worked very hard, but also were treated very well too. So, yeah, the Egyptian workday was basically governed by the sun. As soon as it started getting evening, you went home. So you probably started your workday around 8 or 9 in the morning and worked up till about 6. So roughly 10 hours. So Emily, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Oh, we should also note that the Egyptians did not get a day off. They worked 10 days, and on the worked 9 days, and on the 10th day they worked half a day. So they got half a day off every work week, which was 10 days long. So anyway, thank you for the super chat. Very much.
Week with one whole day off. It's
Oh yeah, absolutely. My producer points out that the 7th day work week with a whole day off, a Sabbath, is radical. Very much so. Yeah. It's a radical departure to how the Egyptians worked. Okay. Eric Zeeler for $2. Sponsored Eric Smith question. Okay. Let's see where I find that. So when early Exodus people say, just trust the calendar years, which calendar do they mean? Laugh out loud. They mean the Julian calendar. I mean, I hate to say this, but it's not a joke. You know, when they do their calculations, they're using the Julian calendar. Because science. They believe that the Bible is chronologically accurate and scientifically accurate. For them, a year is a full solar revolution. Yeah, very anachronistic standard to place upon interpretation to put on the Bible, but that's what they do. So, yeah, that's what they mean. They mean the Julian calendar. They believe that you count 365 and a quarter days, and that the Hebrew prophets were given divine revelation by God to know when they count the years to count it in 365 and a quarter days. So, yeah, that's what they mean. So anyway, thank you for the question, and thank you for the sponsorship of the question by Eric Ziegler. Very much appreciated. JP for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Any suggestions for those struggling with sin? Yes. Yes, absolutely. I'd suggest 3 things. Prayer. You know, keep the lines of communication open with God. Read your Bible, because that's where you're going to get your spiritual strength. And confession. And I don't mean formal confession in the Roman Catholic sense. I mean confess your sins to God regularly. Keep short accounts with God. Even if you think you're backsliding, okay? Even if you're struggling, even if you're backsliding, keep those short accounts with God. God knows your weakness. God knows your struggle. You know, God became flesh. The second person of the Trinity became flesh so he could experience the temptations that we would. So he understands, he knows what it's like to be us. So with those struggling, it's important to always confess your sins. You get on, here's the thing. Salvation is an amnesty. It's not a one-time event. It's an amnesty. It's more important to God that you agree that you're sinning and that you desire to stop it than your perfect track record. God cares less about your perfection than your mindset. He wants you to be of that mindset where you know sin is sin, you know you're struggling, you know you're under temptation, but you're trying to take measures to do it, to change. So keep the line of communications open with God with prayer. Confess your sins to God regularly. Keep very short accounts. And read your Bible, because that's going to be your source of spiritual strength. No, it doesn't have to be formal confession. Yeah, I mean, it could be just, oh no, I did it again. God forgive me. It could be something as simple as that as far as confession. It doesn't have to be formal. You don't need penance. What you need is confession. Keep that slate clean. And that's basically when you confess, you are basically telling God that I recognize my sin. I recognize that I screwed up. I recognize my depravity. Help me, God. Help me change. So that's what I would recommend for those struggling with sin. And you might have to take other measures too. Like there's some merit to accountability groups. Honestly, there are people who keep sliding back in. This is why programs like Alcoholics Anonymous work so well, is they form accountability groups for people who have special proclivities to certain sins. And I'm not saying drinking alcohol is a sin, but the accountability group works. And they have accountability groups for all sorts of things. For gambling, for pornography addiction, and that can be horribly addictive. For drug addiction. So that's what I would recommend, is basically prayer, Bible reading, confession, and if you need it, accountability groups. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Eddie P for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Thoughts on women pastors and elders? In certain ministries, women pastors are appropriate. Definitely. In certain, but here's going to be the issue. I think one of the things we don't understand is why that prohibition on, say, women elders exists. Okay? How do I put this? This is something that's true of the early church as it is today. Women do most of the functions in a church. They do most of the work. And I don't see this is basically just, at the potlucks, there are women there working. Who's doing the cleaning up in the church? It's usually the women. Who's teaching the children? It's the women. Who's organizing the Bible studies? It's the women. They're doing all the work. I think one of the things about, say, the role of elder is it's sort of the one role that is sort of sanctioned by God to be for men. Otherwise, what would they do? I mean,
it's not an honor. It's a responsibility.
And we have to make something really, really clear here. being an elder, being a pastor, is not an honor. It's a responsibility. Too often we treat these like honors. They're not honors. You're taking on incredible amounts of responsibility by doing this. When I was in seminary, you know, I had a professor who used to ask these questions that would, root out the less savory elements in the class. And one of the questions he asked was, who here wants a church of 1,000 people? And you got, some people raise their hands. I wasn't about to raise my hand to that question. It's like, yeah, I know where that's going. I know exactly where that's going. And he said, you realize you are going to be responsible for each and every one of those 1,000 souls. It's a good case for wanting a small church. With more people God brings to you, the more responsible you become. The more you have to attend to your teaching. The more you have to be careful with how you exegete a passage. You should exegete it with care anyway, but the ante is just raised. You are a spiritual shepherd. It's like Jesus said to Peter, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, of course I do. Feed my sheep. Peter, do you love me? Well, of course I do, Lord. Feed my sheep. Finally, Christ says, Peter, do you love me? And he says, Lord, you know I do. Feed my sheep. It is the responsibility of Christian leadership to feed the sheep, to guide, correct, rebuke, and reproof. It's an enormous responsibility, and it comes with so much baggage. This is one of the reasons why the epistles also say, a pastor who does his job is worth double honor. And double honor back then was double the average wage. It was because the responsibility was so high. Those who teach get greater judgment. It's also found in the scriptures. So these people who want to take a responsibility on themselves gratuitously, thinking it's an honor, don't understand the position. They don't understand the responsibility, they don't understand the position, and they don't understand the judgment that follows if you mess it up. Oh, yeah. Yeah. God will judge each and every one of their words and their works. Yeah, just... somebody in the pews is not going to encounter nearly the judgment the pastor is. So, and that judgment is just multiplied the bigger your congregation.
You're judged for everything.
Yeah. My producer points out here that you're judged by the behavior of your congregation, because how you taught them is going to reflect on how they behave.
Correlation between the number of counselors versus exegetical preaching.
Oh yeah, there's a frightening statistic, isn't there? My producer points out that the number of counselors on a pastoral staff is inversely proportional to the quality of the teaching. The higher the quality of the teaching, the lower the number of counselors on the staff. And it seems to be true across the board. Totally true across the board. So I don't think women are doing themselves any favor taking on this role. I really don't. Now, as I said, there's it's not because they're not competent. It's not because they aren't able. It's not because they aren't smart enough. Although they're probably not. I mean, if they really want this role, I mean, I got to question how smart they are, because yeah. It's but then again, I'd also question men who entered that decision gratuitously. It's just, it's like, you don't want this role if you can help it. It's something you're called to, not something you force your way into. Yeah, turning it into a status symbol is just bad all around. Just plain bad. Yeah, it is. My producer just said it's the sin of pride. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Okay. So, anyway, that's sort of my thoughts on this. I have no philosophical reason to deny them, say, a position as a pastor. I think they're appropriate for some ministries. I think some ministries do very well with women pastors, especially all women ministries. I mean, you really can't have an all women ministry without a women pastor, really. So I think in that case, it's totally appropriate. But then again, too, there's also an order of creation that's involved here as well. And
there's a difference between being a pastor and being a teacher.
Yeah, there's a difference between a there is a difference between being a pastor and being a teacher as well. Okay? It's more about spiritual oversight than really is even about teaching. So, yeah, so again, this is a complicated issue. It has complicated exegesis, which is not always clear. And I mean, I don't have any philosophical problem with women pastors, except it does cut men out of the church orthopraxis. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Back to that. I just saw Jack race. I'm not even going to read that. Nick Philstead for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. How does Jesus reveal himself to those on the fence of faith or non-believers? Any advice for people on the fence of Christianity? This might sound simplistic, but try to find some good teaching. Read the Bible. I mean, really, start with the Gospels. Learn who Jesus is. And I think it's either going to move you one way or the other. And you'll find that, say, the Holy Spirit will guide those on the fence. Some will come to faith, some won't. That's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine. The Holy Spirit guides. He enlightens the text. He shows himself through his word. I really fear for Christians that don't read the Bible. And we've become a non-reading culture anyway. And I think that's probably, if you want people to really sort of get into the faith, really in a strong way. And here's what we're doing here. We're creating roots, strong roots from the beginning. You have to create those strong roots in the beginning. You don't wait 20 years and then develop the roots. Start immediately developing those roots. In order for those roots to go deep, it has to get into the texts. You have to read the Bible. This is why reading the Bible is so important. Because it's the text that is God-breathed. And it's through that God-breathed text that the Holy Spirit can speak to your heart. People who abandon the text will backslide. And oftentimes backslide right out of the faith. So, very, very important to get back into the text. You need that to develop those deep roots and to basically, sort of understand the calling of, of the Holy Spirit. So anyway, I hope that helped. thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Daniel Roar of the Logos for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Food for the Sound Foxes. Ooh. The Sound Foxes will be happy. You know, they'll be very happy. They like being fed, you know. Thank you very much for that comment, and thank you very much for the contribution. And I love the fox logo as well. I mean, the icon, it looks really sweet. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat and your support of the channel. We really appreciate it. Jack Ray for $5 buys us a coffee. Thank you very much. Very much appreciated. This is my second coffee here. Is that a cake? Oh, can't read that. I think that's a coffee. Is that a coffee? I don't know. Gosh, I'm going cross-eyed here. Yeah, it looks like a coffee. All right. Thank you very much for the cup of coffee. Very much appreciate it. And thank you for your really generous support of the channel tonight. We really appreciate it. Okay, Addison Weir for $9.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, if evolution turned out to be true, would it conflict with the idea that humanity is made in the image of God? Nah, no one. Asking since Lego David brought up in the live chat. Okay, let's say for the sake of argument, evolution is true. Okay, would that necessarily contradict God's intervention in humanity? No. No. It just would mean that there's a detour in it. And it could have been something that God styled, built into the system too. So that's one of those things that, you know, it's kind of a non-starter. Cup and saucer? Yeah. Yeah, my producer says it's a cup and saucer. Yeah. Oh, Jack Ray said that? Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, as long as God... I mean, here's the thing. Humanity is the moral choice. It's the moral choice. That's what made Adam a human. It wasn't his biology that made him human. It's that God gave him the faculty to have moral decision-making. Animals don't have moral decision-making. They don't have that, you know, if an animal does an evil thing, it doesn't know it's naked. It doesn't know it's done something wrong. It's just behaved as an animal. But in the case of, say, man knows the difference between good and evil, right and wrong. And it also, you know, but the thing that gave humanity its humanness is the living soul, the imago Dei, the spirit that made him a living being. And that was that livingness, that life of the soul that allowed him to choose. And that's what really defines the humanity. Those who came before Adam wouldn't be mankind or humanity in its truest sense. So you could have that evolutionary line go all the way through to Adam, and it'd be neither here nor there. So we also have to understand too that a lot of this is also mytho-history. It's using, say, a kind of mythical framework to tell real historical events in ways that are analogical and are easy for their Bronze Age audience to understand. So, again, it's a tempest in a teapot. If evolution is true, it doesn't do anything to the biblical narrative. If evolution is false, it also doesn't do anything to the biblical narrative. It's almost irrelevant. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, and I hope that helped. Bonbon said, there is no such thing as... Oh, let's take that follow-up here. There is no such thing as mythohistory. Yes, there is. He says, it's another idea by heretic Heister. Heiser. No, actually, it wasn't invention of Heiser. It's actually John Walton who actually coined this idea. And we do have proof of mythohistoric genres. The Iliad, Homer's Iliad. It's a recount of the Trojan War. But you have gods coming down and mythological events interwoven in between it in a way to try to explain many of the events that happened during the Trojan War. So there's no doubt that this exists. So, sorry, Bonbon, here you're wrong. We absolutely know that this happened, that this was a thing. And it was a thing of late Bronze Age literature. Okay, go back here. Where did I leave off? Good question. Okay, I think there... Aston Weir for $1.99. Will we ever get a Kiara Falk face reveal? I think you got one tonight. By mistake. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Sentinel Apologetics for $10 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Daddy Falk, you want to know something? You are ready for Al Hag? Muscle Roller Legend activated. Everyone look it up. You're my daddy god emperor rabbi high school girl crush Ali al-Salam. Okay. Okay. This is something that I asked Sentinel today, what does Daddy Falk mean? Because I frankly didn't know. Apparently, this is something that Ben Stanhope used to say about Michael Heiser. It is meant to be a sign of respect. It's meant to be a way of saying that, you know, you've developed some street cred and become sort of a father mentor like figure. So that's what he means like that, and that's what Ben Stanhope meant when he used the same terms for Michael Heiser. So anyway, it was good to see you here tonight. Rob, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. All right, Sentinel Apologetics again for $10 Australian. David, taking into consideration Heiser's model of Deuteronomy 32:8 worldview in regards to Yahweh versus the gods, I was wondering if the first engagement with the gods started properly with Egypt. Thoughts? I don't agree with Heiser's model for Deuteronomy 32:8. So for me, this question is almost a non-starter. I think there is. I think there's. This can be explained in better terms than basically the Council of Gods motif. The problem I had with Heiser in this particular view, when it comes to Deuteronomy 32, is he's taking an artifact of Second Temple Judaism and he's applying it to Bronze Age literature. And I don't think we find that here. We just don't find that here. So, I think this is more about the division of lands, honestly, than it is about, say, the gods being, the people being handed over to the various gods of the Divine Council. I think that's a very, very Second Temple period thing to say in a piece of literature that's Bronze Age. So again, I think there's issues here with this. So yeah. So yeah, I don't doubt Heiser's view here when it comes to, say, Job. I think there's definitely a Council of God going on there. But when you get into into Pentateuch, I don't feel that that's an appropriate background material to use. So anyway, those are my thoughts on this passage. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I don't know. I think we're getting close to the end. All right, that was, I think. All right, that was the last of the non-bonbon super chats. Do I still have another one? No, I think that's the last one. Yeah, okay, so we'll go back to where we left off with the bonbon ones. Three or four non-super chats and then call it a night. All right. All right, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to take some more non-bonbon stuff and then we're going to close it down. All right? Awesome. Okay. So then I'll start scanning from the bottom here.
What verse would you use to read?
No, I didn't. Do you have a timestamp on that? They're actually on the side there. They should. Okay. Oh, so no, I didn't see that question.
Just read it out.
Okay, can you put it back in the chat then? All right, I'll take Lego David's here. But why do you lean to Calvinism? Doesn't Calvinism deny the existence of free will? Depends what kind of Calvinist you are. Okay. It denies that people can come to Christ on their own, but you're always free to sin more. Okay. So, part of it is I do believe in total depravity. that man is completely incapable of coming to God on his own. So I find that to be rather persuasive. I'm not a 5-point Calvinist, not by any stretch of the imagination. I'm more like a 3-point. So, but that's 3 points more than makes me Arminian. So, so it really depends on what kind of Calvinist you are. Not all people in the Reformed tradition, and I'm not in the necessarily in the Reformed tradition, so I'm not telling you what denomination I am. So don't even try to speculate on that one. But people who do lean towards that have a variety of opinion. I mean, you get people who are, say, some of the new Calvinists who are just complete fatalists, and that's completely out to lunch. But at the same time, too, you also have more moderate ones that will basically say man has free will, but free will to sin. Free to sin all he wants. So it's not a denial of free will, not by any stretch of the imagination. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciate it. Okay, you reposted it, so I'll go back to the bottom here. Okay. This is a question from Harry Stark. Which verses would you use to refute a Jehovah's Witness? I use Isaiah 44:6. They want to say, one of the things that the Jehovah's Witnesses want to say is Jesus is a created being. Okay, let's go to 44:6, because this one is probably a great one to use against Jehovah's Witnesses. Isaiah 44:6. All right, this is one that I have never seen with all the Jehovah's Witnesses apologetics. This is one that I have never seen them handle well, which is they want to say that Christ is a created being, the first being of he's the Archangel Michael. He's the Archangel Michael. So they identify Jesus Christ as being the Archangel Michael, the first creation by Jehovah God. And for them, Jehovah is when you talk to a Jehovah's Witness, you always replace Lord with Jehovah. Okay? Because they think that name's sacred. So when you read a passage like Isaiah 44:6, you read it and replace the word Lord with Jehovah. So try to listen to this like you were a Jehovah's Witness, that you believe Jesus is a created being, the Archangel Michael. Verse 6, thus says Jehovah, the King of Israel. And you'll ask him, who's that? And they'll tell you, oh, that's the Father. Absolutely. Right on, spot on, you got that correct. And his Redeemer, the Lord of the hosts. Or the Jehovah's hosts. And you ask them, who's this? And they'll say, well, it's the Father. Oh, wait, hold it. How can the Father possess himself? This can't be the Father. Who's the Redeemer? And they'll think about it, and it's like, Jesus. Yes, okay, you got Jesus. Now you got two Jehovahs in the text. Jehovah, King of Israel, and Jehovah, his Redeemer. And then you end up with, I am the first, I am the last, there is no God beside me. It's talking about God, not a created being. And it's talking about it in the singular. This one will mess with their heads. Okay, this one really does mess with their heads. Because they believe that there's only one person of the Godhead, and it's Jehovah. Now you show two persons that are both named Jehovah, and that they're one God. They don't know how to handle it. Their organization doesn't know how to handle it. I've never seen a good rejoinder to this from the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. So anyway, that's the one verse that I would sort of always keep in my back pocket if you talk to a Jehovah's Witness. You're going to have to go there eventually. So anyway, Thank you very much for the question. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, we'll take two more and then we'll call it a night. Okay, and back up. Okay, let's see here. I want to take a non-bonbon question here. Find a good one. Oh, I'm taking non-super chats. I'm non-bonbon ones. Just so we spread the wealth around just a little. All right, I'll take this one by Omar Yassan. According to one scholar I read, the Solomonic, I think you mean Solomonic temple, is similar to many pagan temples. Does this mean that God can dwell in something similar to a pagan temple to guide the Israelites? Implications. Okay, here's the thing. Religious rituals in the ancient Near East had commonality. They were all borrowing each other's rituals. The difference is the meaning has been redeemed through Yahweh worship. So it doesn't actually matter if God dwells in something similar to a pagan temple. Because one of the things a pagan temple does is it shows a separation between profane and sacred space. And that whole sacred and profane separation is really, really important in ancient Near Eastern religion. And it's important in the worship of Yahweh, too. That's all, I mean, the temple, the tabernacle, is all about dividing sacred from profane space so that we can have interaction with God. So it doesn't actually matter that they're using the same sort of footprint, as it were, the same blueprint as a pagan temple, or using iconography that was also used by, say, pagans. Like, for example, we find on some Israelite iconography the Wadjet disc, the Egyptian solar Wadjet disc, and it's holding an ankh in both claws. Okay, but it's all being done in redemption through using those symbols to communicate something about Yahweh. So once it's done in this way, it's the symbol's redeemed. It's redeemed and put to use for Yahweh worship. I mean, this is why it doesn't matter that the Ark of the Covenant was patterned after the ritual processional furniture of ancient Egypt. Because what Yahweh does is, in say, ritual processional furniture in Egypt, where you have the two cherubim sticking their wings out over the top, the Egyptians would stick an idol there and then move it around with the idol between the wings. Well, for the Israelites, there's no idol. It completely inverts the symbol. It shows the Israelites that God does not sleep. He's always on the throne. He does not need care by human hands. That's a huge deal in Bronze Age literature. Huge deal. You know, because that was the norm of Bronze Age ritual. Was you put a god, make an idol of a god, you stick him in between the wings, you feed him food offerings, you tuck him to bed, you clothe him, and everything was done using human hands. By using the symbols of, say, pagan culture that everyone in that culture knew, you invert it. You flip it on its head. You give it new meaning. and this redeems the symbols. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay, we're going to take one more non-super chat, and then we're going to call it a night here. Should I answer this Zahi Hawass one? I actually have a Zahi Hawass story. All right, we'll take this one. This will be the last question of the night. How do you feel about Zahi Hawass, his contributions or lack thereof to archaeology and Egyptology? Okay, he is a legitimate scholar. He has done some academic work. You never criticize a person who's as politically connected as Zahi Hawass. That's a career-limiting move. But I was with Harrison, former head of the department at the University of Toronto, and I was at a meeting, RC meeting, and he told me about he had actually been in a class where Zahi Hawass had taught, and Zahi, some guy in his class asked him, "Did the Exodus happen?" Of course, Zahi flipped out. He flipped out. He hated the question. Just went ballistic. And Zahi was going to be giving a lecture at this RC conference, and you had to pay like $50 a ticket. And I said I would not pay $50 to go see Zahi Hawass talk about all his celebrities, but I would pay you, Harrison, to ask that question to Zahi at the Q&A. He goes, "No way." Okay, $100. I'll pay you $100 to ask that question. $200. He just wouldn't bite. He just wouldn't bite. Couldn't pay the man to go ask Zahi Hawass, was there an Exodus?
Okay, Mark Ellis. Super chat.
Okay, we'll take that last one. Okay, we've got one more super chat here, and we're gonna.
That goes up to the ancient Egyptians were notorious for their ancestors.
Okay. It hasn't come through yet. Oh, there it is. Okay. All right. This is going to be the last question of the night, the last super chat, last everything. Marvelous for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Sponsoring Lego David's non-super chat. All right. And he asks, the ancient Egyptians were notorious for their incestuous marriages, which they did in order to keep their bloodlines pure, which resulted in a lot of deformities. When did the practice end in Egypt? Now this is something of a misunderstanding. They didn't do it to keep their bloodlines pure. In fact, they very rarely did it. Cherney did a study of 400 marriages in Egypt. And of those marriages, he found only 2 were consanguineous. Now, how did earlier Egyptologists think, and even people like Herodotus thought this too, that there was a lot of incest in Egypt? It's because of the nicknames they would give each other. A husband and wife would call each other brother and sister. It was a what's it called when you give someone an affectionate name? Yeah, I can't remember the third. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I guess some people in the South do that too. Yeah, good point.
Or when parents have children, they call each other mom and dad.
Well, that's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Parents, when they have children, call each other mom and dad in our culture. So yeah, it's a term of endearment. Thank you, empty disc. A term of endearment. This is a term of endearment. So Egyptian husbands calling their wife's sister was a term of endearment, and same in the reverse, where the wife would call her husband brother. So it's a term of endearment. But this threw archaeologists off for a long time. Now, we do find a few cases of consanguineous marriage. Okay, when, say, for example, there was no heir. It was a form of sympathetic magic to strengthen the bloodline to produce an heir, which of course had the opposite effect. This is what happened with the marriage of King Tut to Ankh-Sunamun. We also have one case where there was a power sharing arrangement through marriage, which was Cleopatra the Seventh to, I believe, Ptolemy the 12th. We don't know if they actually even consecrated the marriage. It sounds like that they got pretty distant pretty fast. So, there's a few cases of it happening in Egyptian history, but not very many. So it's a very rare event. So then this is also why in these we don't actually see a lot of deformities, is because there wasn't actually that much incestuous marriages happening in Egypt. So anyway, the practice never really began except among certain royals. So the practice never really ended either. I mean, it just was, at that point, it was once Egypt got taken over by the royals, of course, or by the Romans, the practice even for royals ended at that point because there were no more royals. So get rid of the monarchy and you have no more incestuous marriage. Solve that problem. So anyway, Lego David, thank you very much for the question. Great question. We very much appreciate it. And thank you to your sponsor, Marv Alice, for the super chat. We really appreciate it. And at this point, we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank special thanks to, again, for the really, really generous super chat tonight from Slade Neighbors, who gave us $300. We really appreciate it. We thank you for the very generous support from Jack Ray. There was no way I was going to get all those bonbon questions answered, not in a 3-hour session. So thank you for being generous and understanding about that. Yeah, I know you were trying to waterboard me, but I still appreciate the generosity nonetheless. So I want to thank all our super chatters tonight. You were very generous to us tonight, and we really, really appreciate it. So, so grateful. Thank you very much to our Patreon supporters who keep the lights on and the hardware running, especially this last week where we had some technical difficulties with our website. That's fortunately all been resolved. We still need to repair one of our firewalls, but at least we're back up, and it's thanks to your generous support. I also want to thank our regular subscribers, and if you haven't subscribed, please do so that if you so you don't miss any of our content. And we also want to thank everyone who likes and passes our URLs to our video onto platforms we're not on, because that helps get the message out. So with that said, have a great night. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.